Hello, I'm Tom Burniece. I'm a volunteer at the Computer History Museum. I'm the chairman of the Storage Special Interest Group, and I'm here to interview today Ellen Lary. On full disclosure, I want to let you know that I was involved in hiring into Digital Equipment Corporation in the early 80s, and for a short while reported indirectly to me, and for an
Yes,
even
it
shorter
did.
while reported directly to me. I know Ellen reasonably well. So I'm going to let her introduce herself, but I want her to start out, talk about her background, where she grew up, where she went to school, what her family was like. So, Ellen,
Okay.
Larry.
Hi. I was born in outside of Buffalo, New York,
Okay.
and that's where I grew up and went to college. I'm the oldest of four children. My father was an engineer. My mom was at home, a homemaker, as in those days. I have two brothers and a sister. So I went to high school and college, just high school and elementary school in Kenmore, New York, which is a suburb of Buffalo. Um, Always interested in math and science. Went on to college at the University of Michigan and ended up majoring in chemistry with an education degree. Mostly because my mother was, you should be a teacher. Being a teacher is great. You can be a mother, you could be a teacher, be a teacher. So I ended up getting an education degree, which was not what I really wanted. But I did teach for a few years. Would you like me to talk about where I
Yeah, what
taught?
level did you teach at? And what was it, high school or junior high school or what?
Mostly junior high school,
Okay.
and a couple of interesting experiences. One of them was at a Hebrew day school.
Wow.
And I worked afternoons at the Hebrew day school. The kids would learn about the Jewish culture, language, and so on in the morning. And then the afternoon, there was another woman who worked with me, and we had the fifth and sixth graders and taught them math, science, English, and social studies. So I did that for a number of years when my kids were really little. I also worked in public schools and taught at the junior high school level.
And what were you teaching? What were the subjects?
Math and science.
So math and science, all right. Did you get up into algebra or higher?
No, it was a junior high school.
So junior high school is basic math.
Yeah, basic math,
Yeah,
seventh,
right.
eighth graders.
Pre-algebra kind of stuff. Okay.
Right, all pre-algebra kind of stuff. And then when I had kids and decided to go back into the workforce, I decided that what I really wanted to do was engineering. That was I wanted to be from the very
Now,
beginning.
how long was that from the time you got out of college and went to become a teacher before you started to go back to school?
Let's see, it was probably like 5 or 6 years.
Okay.
And I got to know, this was in Syracuse, New York. So I had moved with my husband to Syracuse, New York. And I was involved with a group of people there, and we met kind of informally and were concerned about education and children. And having small kids, I was concerned about what kind of education my kids would get. So, along with that small group of people, we started a free school called Gewonio at Syracuse University with the help of the professor there. And so it was one of these open free schools
Okay.
where the kids go and there's no grades, and they study like Summerhill in England, and they study. And what typically happens with the kids is they, if you were to test them, they would lag behind public school kids till about the fourth or fifth grade, and then boom, really accelerates. So, especially with boys, they tend to learn later than girls, and so on. So I helped start this school, which was in some Quonset huts up above Syracuse University, and we hired teachers and painted the facilities and had probably 60 or 70 kids going to the school.
Now, are these kids from all over the Syracuse area or
Yeah.
from the university kind of area?
Anybody who wanted to go could
Anybody
go.
could go, okay, and for free, right?
No, there was some tuition.
Oh, there was tuition, okay.
Yeah, and I actually worked there too, and helping to start it. But the connection is that one of the people there was the professor in the engineering department. And I got to know Bruce and his pretty well while we were there, and talking about things. he knew I was interested in engineering and actually offered me a working fellowship to go back to school and study.
Now, you had a bachelor's degree in education, right?
Yeah.
So were you going back to get another bachelor's degree in engineering, or were you starting at a little higher level?
I was going back to get a master's degree and a PhD.
Yeah, but did you start right at the master's level?
Yes.
So you went back for a master's in engineering?
Yes.
Okay, right from a education bachelor's.
That's correct.
Interesting. All right.
That's what I did.
And you do that without any significant amount of stuff you had to catch up on, or you were at math and science well enough that you could just start right out in a master's program?
It was like being thrown in the deep end of the pool.
Well, I would imagine it was.
I can remember, I would sit in the class, and I especially remember this with respect to the professor talking about hysteresis.
Okay.
And I'm like, how do you spell that?
It's like hysteria, right? What is it all
What
about?
is this all about? And literally, I would sit in the class and try to take as many notes as I could, guessing at the spelling of this stuff because I didn't know what the hell was going on. And then I'd go out and research and teach myself and so on.
Wow.
And that's how I got started into engineering.
Did you know what engineering degree you wanted to get?
The guy that I was working with was also doing a project where there was a robot and we were teaching kids how to program the robot to wander around.
Okay.
And that's what got me really interested in computing and learning about that part of engineering.
Now, you're talking about at least 30 years ago, right? So this is a pretty primitive robot.
Yeah, it was pretty
But
primitive.
they could program it.
Yeah, they could program it. It would walk around, and so we were teaching kids that, and I was teaching me that. And Bruce offered me this ability to go back, and I worked for him doing various performance studies on a Staran array processor, which was the Staran array processor was in residence at Romare Development Center, and Bruce had funding from Romare Development Center to look at algorithms and how they might be better performed with an array processor. And we were actually doing matrix inversions.
All right, so you were showing you had some chops already.
So I had to
in analytical kind of math.
I had to go in and figure out how to program this.
So had you done any program before at all?
No.
So you had to learn programming from scratch too.
Yeah. And a funny story is that I remember Bruce telling me that this was Bruce Baer, a professor at Syracuse University, who was willing to take a chance on me with this weird background. And anyhow, he said, you should just start out write a couple of simple programs in Fortran. I thought, oh, that's easy. I said, I'll just write this and it'll run right away.
Those were the days when you're passing paper tapes through the
I was
window, right?
passing punch cards.
Punch cards, okay.
It was
Same
punch
deal.
cards.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
So that's how I started out. And then got into using the Staran Associative Array Processor as the basis for my dissertation and so on.
So when you first started all that, though, did you just think you were going to go in electrical or mechanical or aero or something, or were you just really want to get in engineering and you kind of led your way into what eventually became relational database stuff?
Yeah, because he did database work.
Okay.
Under the operations research department. It wasn't under computer science.
Yeah, right. Well, was there even a computer science department?
Yes, there was.
Okay.
Yes, there was. So I took a number of computer science courses too. When I finished, I had a degree in computer science, operations research, a master's in both of those, and a PhD in operations research.
Oh, so you actually ended up with a double master's.
Yes, I did.
Yeah, okay, so those two things. But
Between
operations research was your PhD department.
Correct.
And were you studying relational databases in that, or was that just a sideline?
Well, I had to take all the required courses for an OR degree, but the relational databases was sort of a sideline, I guess, but that's where I kind of majored.
Now to calibrate people, we're talking about, because I know you joined DEC in the early 80s, so we're talking the 70s.
Correct.
How much relational database technology was already out there?
Very, very little.
Basically, right?
Yes, right. It had just been invented. There were not if any, commercial systems. Nothing that was a real success at that
I'm
time.
trying to remember, was it Ted Codd that invented it?
Gosh,
I
I
got
don't
the wrong
remember,
name,
Tom.
But I think it was at IBM or someplace like that. Was
Yeah,
invented, yeah.
it could be. I
But
don't
it was
remember.
very early days.
Yes, it was.
Okay.
Yes, it was.
So tell us a little
So
about
then
that.
I finished in 1981 is when I finished
right.
with my doctorate.
So tell us a little bit more about that experience of basically taking notes on things you didn't understand what they're talking about, and then going and teaching yourself what it was so that you could pass the test and move on, and end up with a couple of master's degrees in engineering from a education degree. I mean, this is amazing. What was that like? And because you got kids at the same time.
Yes, I had 2 children. That I had a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old.
Wow.
And I was single. So.
So you were actually divorced before you started this.
No, I got divorced afterward, but we were separated for a long,
yeah. All right, okay.
Separated for a long time during that, yeah.
Wow.
So, yeah, that was.
Pretty impressive.
It was what work, but I loved it. Even though it was overwhelming, it was fun. It was what I wanted to do. Teaching was not what I wanted to do.
So if you go back and think back, well, my earlier question was, who are the people who influenced you? You had an engineering father and a homemaker mother.
Mm-hmm.
The mother initially influenced you to go into teaching because that's the right thing for a woman to do in those days,
right.
which it was. That or nursing is usually what they talked about. But obviously your father was an influence because you got the bug about engineering at some point. Right?
Yeah,
or were there other people that did that?
No, it was just what interested me. And my dad, what I did was nothing like what he did. He actually was an engineer, but he was in sales engineering.
Oh, was he? Okay.
And he was had a mechanical engineering background and sold all the big systems to companies like GM that had to put in the machine tools to build their cars and so on. And there was a lot of that business in Buffalo, so that's what he did.
All right. Well, he had a fundamental background as a mechanical engineer with a degree, and then he decided to go on the sales side of the business rather than the design side of the business.
Right. But, I mean, he was always very encouraging to me about what I would do. My mother, even, by the way, when she came to visit me when I was in school studying for my doctorate, and she saw how hard I was working, she was like, "Why don't you just stop and go get a job?" I'm like, wow. This is going to be a good job, a good career for me, and I'll be able to take care of my kids.
Did you actually decide before you went back for that new coursework that you actually were going to go all the way to PhD right from then?
I was pretty sure that I was.
You wanted to go that far?
Yeah, okay. I did.
And how long did that all take?
5 years.
From the time you started?
Yeah.
To 2 degrees and a PhD?
Yeah.
Boy, you were working hard.
I worked pretty hard.
Yeah, well, 5 years I think is on the short side of a typical PhD, especially starting at the master's level. So,
yeah.
Wow. So what was your thesis on?
It had to do with using the Starion associative array processor, and I actually incorporated the work I did with manipulating large matrices.
Okay.
And the studies on the performance and comparing that to the performance on a regular computer.
So fundamentally, you were doing a computer science type of a PhD thesis rather than a relational database, what the effect of a matrix processor versus a standard processor, et cetera.
And that's what he was getting funding from Romare Development Center.
Right.
And so that funding then funded me. And I would periodically go over to Romare Development Center, which was a large Air Force base.
Was that close to
hour and a half
Syracuse?
away.
Okay. Oh, an hour and a half.
Yeah, go over there and work and run systems and so on.
And you obviously also got quite skilled in programming, and so you now had a software background you're building here.
Yeah, so I would say so in I'm not in love with programming, never have been. That's Richie's territory.
Well, there's no question about that. Yeah, I was going to make a comment to that you're married to one of the best programmers of all time.
It's never been my interest, actually, programming.
Wow. All right, so now you've done this PhD, you've done it in 5 years, and you're looking for your first job. Were you being recruited heavily by people at that point?
I don't remember being particularly recruited. I don't even remember how I got my first introduction, actually, to Bell Laboratories.
Well, you ended up at
But I
Burniece.
ended up at Bell Laboratories.
And did they bring you in because of what you did in your thesis, or just a general purpose PhD that they wanted to get you in an organization and find something to do?
I really don't know.
All right, well,
I honestly don't know.
well, what
But-
did they have you doing first?
Well, I ended up in a research project where I was actually building a little tiny board that also was an array computer myself, and programming it to do some things.
All right. So you're programming a little
And
board
building
device.
hardware.
What was that? Was that actually a little computer memory system that you could turn into some kind of an engine?
It was, on a board, and I had to solder all the pieces in, and
Oh, you had to put it together and all that. Huh?
yeah,
But
everything.
now you learn how to solder.
Yeah, no, I learned how to solder.
And you also learn a little bit of circuit design.
Yeah, that's right.
What kind of resistor that is and where it's got to go.
Yeah, what is a
bypass the
resistor?
capacitor and all that stuff, right? All right, so you get a little double E. Okay.
Did that for a couple of years, and then ended up, but I was thinking about the base technology and how you apply it to some things with relational databases.
So
So
you're
I
already
ended up
thinking about
going-
putting that together.
Yeah, and so I ended up going to a conference sponsored by Syracuse University in the Adirondacks.
Okay.
And when I was there, I met Barry Rubinson.
So that's how you met Barry.
That's
Okay.
how I met Barry
Wow.
at a conference.
Wow, so he
and
went to
Barry-
the same conference and you ran into Barry.
That's right. And Barry was looking to start the database advanced group at Digital.
Right.
And so he started recruiting me at that conference.
All right, so that's the coincidence.
That is the
I
connection.
never did quite know how that actually happened. So you met him at this conference in the Adirondacks of all places.
Well, Syracuse is close to that.
Yeah, no,
There is a fantastic conference center there.
Okay.
And just wonderful for, connections with people, and you're outside. It's just great.
Oh, it's a wonderful area. Actually, I was there several years ago with my wife, and yeah, I love the Adirondacks. They're
Yeah.
wonderful. That's neat. So Barry's after you now to go join the
Digital.
the Digital in what was just be forming to become an advanced database group in Colorado Springs, which again, just for non-disclosure or disclosure to the people we're talking to. I was there as the engineering manager for all of the disk and controller related stuff in high-end storage at DEC.
Now, were you there when I started?
Yes.
Or did you come
I
in
came
after
in
it?
August '81. Right.
Okay, and I came in shortly after
Yeah,
that.
very shortly, right.
November.
And we early on, he convinced me and Mike Riggle, who was my peer at that time, also in Colorado Springs, very early on that this thing we were building called an HSC could do database as well as block storage.
And it could become the basis for a
Right.
database machine.
Yes, it was going to be the basis of a database machine. And so basically that's why he started hiring people that knew something about databases, because we thought we could turn this into it. It turned out we never did that because I found out it was way more difficult
Yes.
than we thought it would be, particularly on hardware. And so we scrapped the program after several years, but we got a database program started with you, one of the leaders, that turned into a database systems group at DEC that eventually got sold to Oracle. So there's a lot of history here, but that's how it started.
Yeah, and I was on the advanced development side of it.
Right.
And then eventually a product development team also started.
Yes, it did. Yes, it did.
And that was separate from me. I was strictly involved with the advanced development group, and I would say, in fact, we probably should have been more closely associated. It would have been technology transfer, and all that stuff would have happened a little easier. But I was involved then with the MCC down in Austin, Texas.
Oh, were you? Okay.
I helped start
Describe
Digital,
what that is, by the way.
the Microcomputer Consulting Consortium.
Yeah.
Computer Consortium.
Yeah, something like that, right?
Yeah.
It was just, as a brand new thing that was just invented was getting the industry to just co-sponsor.
To compete with the Japanese
to
fifth
compete with the
generation.
Japanese, right. And,
And-
you're absolutely right. Everybody's worried about the Japanese are going to take over with
Correct.
artificial intelligence, and machines are going to transcend everything they got and the world's over.
Right.
Right.
So Digital decided to invest in it,
Right.
and decided to invest in the database part of it. And I was the point person who went, attended all the meetings, helped with how we put the structure together and so on down there, funded projects, figured out what they should be, and so on.
All right, so you came in just after I did, in
Yes,
81.
couple months, yeah.
And what was the initial group look like? I know Barry was there, obviously, but Barry was full-time on the HSC. He was the architect of the HSC.
He also started another group, and that was the architecture group.
Right. Yeah, he
It was-
actually started what became the group that Richie eventually became the CTO of. the leader
Right.
of.
And it was Jim Ladowski and Jim Zarobski.
Right.
Ladowski and Zarobski. You know,
Remember that?
and so when I came, it was Barry, those two guys, and Barry had a sort of a consulting arrangement with John Murray from college.
Yeah, right.
So John was doing some consulting with Barry, but that's it.
Yeah, so that was the group.
That was the group, and then everybody from there to hire to bring the group, I was part of hiring and bringing on in, and we built the group completely, and then also the product development group started, but I didn't have anything to do with that.
Right. Well, actually, Barry reported jointly to
You and Mike.
myself and Mike, and I would say Mike was more of the direct line. I was more of the indirect line on that piece, the database. But I was definitely the direct line on the HSC, which is where he was spending most of his time.
Right.
So, all right. So, tell me about how that group grew and some of the key people that came in at various times and what you first started focusing on.
Well, initially, as I said, we were doing the work with MCC
Okay.
and all of that, and then after that was off the ground. You mentioned to me earlier over lunch neural networks.
Yeah.
One of the guys we had hired was Dave Wecker, and he was an expert in neural networks, and so he began building some of that neural network technology in with the database. And then we had John Murray. I don't remember what John exactly was doing.
Well, he was a professor at one of the schools.
Yes,
yeah.
at UCCS.
Yeah, right.
But
I was at UCCS. Okay, so that was University of Colorado in Colorado Springs. So he was
correct.
a professor there. Okay.
Yeah, and then we just added people as we went. Eventually, there was a time then when Barry left.
You mean the database side?
Yeah, the database side, and I ended up as the manager of the database side.
That was probably when we were finally getting HSC into production, and we probably needed to get them full time on that.
Yeah, so I ended up managing.
So you had the database group in Colorado Springs at that point.
That's correct, and I sat on Mike Riggle's staff.
Okay, so you were working directly for Mike.
I was working for Mike in that capacity. I started out as eventually became a manager and then a senior manager and worked my way up. What I remember is going to a lot of Mike's staff. I went to Mike's staff meetings, of course, and a lot of it was about disk technology and so on.
Yeah.
It was all stuff that I didn't know. I learned a lot about it and so on. But I was the only woman on the team.
Well, I believe that.
Probably the only woman in
You're the one in the building practice.
Yeah, right.
Except for the executive assistants.
Yeah.
Yeah, and again, to calibrate our audience here, Mike Riggle was actually in charge of all advanced development for storage
Yeah.
within DEC, reporting directly to Command Severes. I also reported to Command, but I had just a high-end disk and subsystem group.
Right.
But he fed a lot of that technology because most of the architecture came from Mike that we were using what's called the digital storage architecture systems. And he had moved to Colorado Springs just before I did from Boston, where I used to work in Maynard. But he had a lot of irons in the fire. So his staff was talking about everything, but a lot of it was disk and controller related because that was a huge part of our business.
Absolutely. But he ended up also putting me on the patent committee.
Oh, did he? Okay.
Because, we were trying to figure out there was some stuff that would come to the patent committee that was database related and none of the people on his staff, et cetera, had any background in that. So I ended up being on the patent committee for digital as a result of that.
So when did you and Barry basically split and you were now in charge of the database? You remember when that was?
I really
Like 2 years in or so?
Maybe 3 or 4 years in.
Okay. Because the HSC started shipping in '83, but it literally wasn't a real product with anywhere close to functionality until about '85, '86.
Yeah.
And during that time, there was a lot of pressure for Barry and the other crew to get this stuff done. It was a huge project. So I could see where that would have happened in that time frame.
Right.
Now, one of the names that I'll never forget was Jim Starkey. And he was brought into your group at one point.
No, he never was part
Or
of
was
my
he always
group.
in the East? But
He was always in the East, and
Okay.
he was a firecracker.
he was definitely a firecracker.
Yeah, and he was very resentful of my group.
Okay.
All the folks who were, well, at that point, the product development in databases was all in New Hampshire.
Right.
And then there was this startup RDB Star group, which was distributed database, as opposed to just, not distributed database,
Right.
which was RDB. And Jim Starkey's little advanced development things. And I forget, he had some system that he had invented. And I'll never forget, we had, he just thought everybody should adopt what he had. Very, very, very complex, hard to use.
Oh yeah. Jim was a character, but he was bright. In fact, he's the guy that invented what's now called New ODB, and he's now, I think, basically retired or just on the board.
Oh,
But that's one of the best database systems out there right now.
yeah,
New ODB, and that's after we left us.
yeah, right. I've lost track of where he was, so I didn't know that.
Yeah.
But I remember we had Larry Ellison, who's, of course, Oracle,
Right.
came in to see a demo of RDB and Starkey stuff and some of the RDB Star stuff. And we also were running Oracle. And he was there, and the other person who came in was Grant Severes.
Right.
And so they were looking at how you run various things with these various systems. And I just remember afterward Grant going, oh, it's so easy to use Oracle. And the Starkey stuff nobody could figure out. It could do everything, but you couldn't figure out how to do everything.
There actually was an opportunity at one point, and I don't remember exactly when it was, to buy Oracle. And we never really got, I think, an oar in the water, but we probably could have done that. Eventually, Oracle ended up buying
Yes.
the database group out of DEC, but
Yeah,
they
they
actually had
did.
an opportunity. And there was one other that was running in parallel to that, and I can't remember the name of it. It wasn't Oracle. That was also an early player in the relational database world that also was trying to do a database machine. You may
There
remember
were
who that was.
there were a lot of them around. You don't need Mike Stonebreaker's work at
Well, Stonebreaker was one of them, but I'm thinking of something else. But
Teradata.
yes, Teradata, right, Teradata, right.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, they did end up building something
Right.
called a database machine at some
Right.
point. It's still around.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Yes, it is. And so we had all these different groups, and in Colorado we had RDB Star and the Advanced Development Group under two different managers. And then there was the group in Massachusetts, and a lot of competition between
Yep.
the three teams. That's the way digital used to run, competing products, and
Yes.
let the best one win.
Right.
And eventually we ended up being put under a single manager.
Well, that was
That was
me.
yes.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that
You
was,
inherited
we'll,
a mess.
We'll go back and we'll kind of put a little bit of context in place. There was, as you indicated, a lot of competition and even animosity between the groups in the East and the group in Colorado. And we actually got to the point where either Grant asked for or somebody asked Grant to get somebody to referee this. And they brought an independent guy, I can't remember his name, had an Indian background, from East, India. Very, very smart guy that was considered a really rational, balanced person that would make a good decision. And so we actually had I call it the database war, runoff for a week.
See, I wasn't part of that.
Yeah, and we actually did this, and Starkey and crew, or I thought were on our side if I remember right, but I could be wrong about that. But the other side had the son of one of the two founders of Intel, Noyce.
Oh yeah, Bill Noyce,
Bill Noyce.
right.
He was
Bill
the
was
son
an
of-
RDB,
He was
yes.
the son of the so it turned out to be a gun battle between Bill Noyce and Starkey.
Well, and they were both in the East.
Yeah.
The person in the West was Dave Schrader.
You're right, it was Schrader. So, okay, it's another character in this we'll have to get to Dave. So anyway, he made gun back between the two. And
See, I wasn't included in any of that.
so I didn't realize that. So anyway,
Uh.
when it was over, the referee said, the East is going to win, but I want somebody from the West to put the two groups together. And Grant pointed at me and said, you're in charge.
I remember when you were
Temporarily.
put. Yeah, then
I'll go find somebody who knows something about database, because I didn't know anything about database, but you're in charge of putting this together. So I put the group together over in the late '86 time frame, and early into '87, and you at some point were actually reporting to me at that because you still had your advanced development group. But we merged the two groups.
Right, and then I think they also had me
Right.
report to you.
Right.
So you had product
Right,
development
right.
and advanced development
And then we went and hired, or Grant went and hired a database expert,
on Skillstrom.
right? And he came in somewhere in, I'm going to say late '87 and took over. So I had that group for about 9 months, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And that integrated group then created RDB, Elan, and something else, and eventually got sold to Oracle.
Well, and what I remember about that time is you were having the same experience I had when I went into engineering. Because you and I would get together, you'd call me up and say, call me into your office and say, what does this mean?
Yeah, right.
Because you were having the same,
Well,
I don't know what this word is, and these people are talking about all this.
Yeah, I knew nothing about database. I
Yeah.
really didn't. I mean, I was learning a little bit, but I certainly didn't know anything about it.
Yeah,
that
you,
was
so do you
interesting.
remember that you and I had a lot of conversations?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely did. So let's talk about Schrader, because Schrader actually ended up at Teradata at some point.
Correct.
I'm not sure where he is now, but he was a very smart
He's
guy.
retired.
Yeah, so he's retired now. So when did he join the group, and what was his?
Gosh, I don't
function?
know because I didn't hire him.
Okay, but he went into Colorado.
He came into Colorado. This was the product development group. I didn't have anything to do with the
All right,
product
right. So
development
you're doing
group.
investment development. Okay.
We were, doing other things. And that's when I was building the group in Munich and also
Okay.
funding research in Japan and various, that's what my team was doing.
Okay.
And Dave Schrader came in under Kevin Smith, I think, or eventually ended up with Kevin
Well, actually,
Smith.
Kevin was
Kevin worked
given
for
the
you.
job. Kevin Smith was. Is Smith right? Yeah, I think Kevin Smith is right. Was given the job of basically being the marketing guy for all of that, or product management guy for that, I guess. And I think he was brought in under him.
Well, no, Kevin ended
But
up,
Hans
he
von-
was the engineering manager
You're right.
for
you're
that
right,
group when
right.
we were
Hans
over in
made him
CXN.
Yes, right. Okay.
And so we were over in that other building,
Right.
not on the Colorado campus, but over by Chapel Hills Mall.
Yeah, right.
And Kevin had the product development team, and I had the advanced development team. And
Yeah.
then there were some of the marketing. Paul Masiglia was over
Paul
there.
Masiglia was a very good brown discount, basically.
So,
Right.
yeah.
Right. Yeah, that's right. Right. Yeah. Masiglia got involved as a marketing guy. Smith
Right.
had the engineering for a while, right? And you had the advanced development, right?
Right.
And then you reported up to Hans Gilstrom.
Yeah, and Gilstrom,
Right.
Gyllstrom,
That's about right.
out of Atlanta.
Yeah. He was actually working for Univac when we hired him,
Okay.
but he had a relational database background.
Yeah. Right.
All right. Interesting. So Schrader was working in the product group under Barry originally, and then eventually ended up under probably Kevin.
I
right?
think under Barry originally. I was, as I said, I wasn't involved in
Okay.
that side of it.
Well, let's talk back about your side. What were the things that you concentrated on your side, and what were some of your big accomplishments, or things you were
Well-
most proud of?
Things I'm most proud of. Oh, I think, building the team is something. You being able to build an international team where I had people in Germany and people in Japan and
Okay.
people, just building that whole team and having a group of people that could work together. That was pretty good. The project that ended up being most successful was Diddly.
Yep. We want to talk about Diddly. So tell us what Diddly is. It's a great name.
Digital's Integrated Distributed Database Utility.
Wow.
That was Diddly, and it came out of as we progressed going through learning more about databases. We got involved with multimedia databases, and what we saw as the future was a way to interact with a database system that could involve all of the multimedia types.
Now describe what you mean by multimedia.
Yeah, so it could be voice, it could be video, could be, we got involved in the medical side of it, so it could be you're doing a heart test on somebody, and you could have that as input. So we ended up putting together a demo system that grew out of some of our research connections. 'Cause managed all the research connections from Digital's database team into various parts of the world. And so we would learn about technology there and then be able to incorporate it into our work. So we chose medical as the area in which we'd apply all of this. So we could interact with the system by speaking to it, because we had voice recognition, neural networks underneath that, and then we had all these different types of, like the CPR, not CPR, but you know what I mean, the heart output,
Right.
and various things. We went to an early DEC World where they had an area set up for various advanced technologies to demo. And Dave Wecker was there with his headset on, and he would speak to the system, diddly, get this, diddly, do that. And he's one computer off in the corner of this advanced development area. Well, it caught the imagination of the DEC World crowd. And after starting out, and we had maybe, you know, people would come and look at the demo, 5 or 10 people. We had hundreds of people every half hour. I mean, the area was so crowded, they moved us to another area.
Well, we get calibrated. We're talking 30 years ago.
Yeah,
And that's what stuff is just happening now.
correct. We were on the
Be able to
leading
talk to
edge.
somebody about doing something and having neural networks involved
Yeah,
and artificial intelligence and all that kind of stuff, that's brand new stuff that
Yeah.
people think. But you were doing that 30 years ago.
so we had diddly, and it took off. It was this star of the show because it was this new stuff. I mean, literally hundreds of people every half hour. You couldn't even get in the room.
Now, when you say
There
it
was.
took off, besides getting a lot of attention at the show, did it actually result in some contracts and some people that wanted you to build something for them in a
Oh,
real
yes.
system and was going to lead to revenue and all that?
Yeah, and the database group didn't want to get involved.
Okay, so they did not want to be involved.
No, so I formed a relationship with the service organization where they would, from the services perspective, deliver it, put it in, customize it for people, and that's how we would deliver diddly to customers.
So it'd be a pure software product being delivered by services?
Yeah, yes, and they would integrate all the various pieces.
Okay.
You know, I mean, there'd be voice recognition cards, some specialized hardware.
But
that
you
goes.
guys are doing basically the software side, right? So they would become the systems integrators, in a sense.
Yeah.
Was it the CSSE group within DEC,
Yes.
which is a specialized
Yes.
systems group? All right. So that's what you meant by the service organization.
Yeah.
It's the CSSE group.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, you're right. It's
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
a better
there was
name.
They always did custom stuff.
Right.
Right. Okay.
So
But
they
were
were
part of
interested.
services.
They were interested
Okay.
in being able to deliver it. So then by the next year when we went to DEC World, we had this huge booth. Instead of just a computer off in the corner, we had one of those mega booths. And in it, we had all the different equipment that we integrated. And up at the top, there was a spinning ball, you know, one of those mirror balls like they have that would attract people to come over.
Right.
But we had, you know, and so Dave Wecker would then do the demos in there, and you could control all the various pieces of hardware connected to Diddly through voice to the computer.
And what were you demonstrating? Were you actually
The
demonstrating?
medical stuff, yeah.
The medical stuff? Okay.
Yeah.
So we're now talking about like 87, 88, something like that?
The second year after, yeah, I'd have to look up the dates. I told
Okay.
you I brought a copy. I can
Okay.
look it all up if you want me to.
Well, but I know for sure that Gilstrom started in 87. So that's a benchmark.
Yeah, so it was after that.
Yeah,
It
so
was
it's
either
after that.
88
So
or
probably
88,
88 and maybe 89. Okay.
Right.
In fact, in one of those years, the DEC World was, or it wasn't DEC World in those days. It was something else was held on the Queen Mary or Elizabeth, whatever it was.
Yes,
in
I
Boston
think
Harbor.
this was on the Queen Mary
Yeah,
when we
Queen
had the
Mary
big
in
booth.
Boston Harbor, right?
That's
So
when we
they
had
did
the
this.
big booth,
Now that was probably closer to 1990 or 1989.
something like that. Yeah,
Right. The last couple of years I was there.
right. And then under Hans Gilstrom, he didn't. I don't know why there was no interest or just what the politics were going on at the top, but he then pushed me off to the side to report to Dieter Golick.
Oh, is that right? Okay. All right. So you're no longer part of the database group.
Well, no, Dieter Golick was part of the database group. I'm
Oh,
not
I
sure
see. All right, so he
but
buried
he
you down
pushed
a
me.
level.
He
Okay.
pushed me down. As I told you, they didn't want to have any.
Yeah, right.
And meanwhile, all these people are clamoring to have this technology. So the interesting thing that happened then, and it happened at that DEC World. One of the guys gave an interview to one of the people on the press and told them, yeah, this is becoming a product and so on and so forth. Very definitive, like DEC's decided to take this ahead. I had nothing to do with it. I wasn't even around when this happened. But Dieter decided that I did it.
Okay.
And that it was a direct violation of orders to not talk about this.
Not announce a product, basically.
Not announce a product, not talk about Diddley as a product in any way. And I began to have the experience of various people on his staff coming to me and threatening to fire me and bring me up on charges for this or that or the other thing. It was very unpleasant. And I went to personnel and said, hey, tell them to cut this out. This is harassment. Leave me alone. And I don't know, maybe the word got back or whatever, but that's when, it just became intolerable. And I also found out later that they were going around and talking to people in the group and trying to find out things about me so that they could fire me.
Okay. Wow.
At that point. That's when I went over and worked for Charlie Christ.
Okay. So Charlie brought you. Now, Charlie at that point had basically replaced Grant as the head of storage because Grant had got kicked up a level to have PCs and a couple other things plus storage. So Charlie reported to Grant. So you went to work for Charlie
as his multimedia strategist.
Okay. And of course, Richie was working for Charlie at that point. Right?
But in storage, nothing
storage,
to do with what I was doing.
So this you did not yet quite have the he's working for you relationship you had a couple times later, but you now were both working for Charlie.
For Charlie. And Charlie basically saved me. You know what I mean? Dieter was ready to can me.
Yeah.
Because he thought I had done all of this impropriety stuff and announced products and done what he said I couldn't do. And he was a very tough German guy. And he wasn't going to stand for any of that from a woman.
Well, I understand what's happening here because I lived through parts of that. But bottom line is that they did have a very rigid process for announcing products within DEC. You had to go to a committee to get them to approve you announcing a product, and you had to have a whole plan. Well, how they're going to put the press releases together, how they're going to roll it out, when it's going to be available, when they're going to get pricing, all that stuff. That was a very elaborate process. I went every one of our products that we did. I had to go through that.
Right. But so, I didn't do that.
But bottom line is that he was basically harassing you at this point. And
yes.
Had some kind of vendetta. Was going to try and get rid of you. And so Charlie saved your job, I guess.
That's correct. He saved my job within digital.
Okay.
And he saw a future in multimedia.
Okay.
And so I went and sat on his staff, and we did. And I remember sitting on his staff the day that Ken Olson resigned.
Oh, we're now moving into about 92.
Yeah.
Because he resigned not long after I left DEC.
Yeah, so I was in Charlie's staff, and Charlie got called out to take a call and came back and said, Ken is gone, Bob Palmer.
Yeah, and actually Charlie was my all-time favorite to get that job, and Palmer got it instead, and I always felt that wasn't quite right. But anyway, that's another whole story. All right, so we're now up to about 92, and at some point you left DEC.
Right, it was shortly after that.
Essentially on your own, right?
Shortly after that, sometime within the year after I moved over to work for Charlie, there were a bunch of layoffs that were held, and I actually I volunteered to.
Oh, that's right. Richie mentioned it. So you had a layoff list that included you.
Right. A
bunch of employees for you and you.
Well, no, this was just me. Personally at that time.
Okay.
So I left, but at that time I was being recruited by Syncom, who wanted to start up a database group in Colorado Springs and do the diddly kind of stuff with their database at its basis.
So they had been enamored by this and they wanted to start a company on this. Now, tell me a little about that company, because I'm not sure I know who they were.
Well, they were out of Cincinnati, and they had a database product. I don't remember the name of it, but it was a fairly small company and all in Cincinnati. And two of the people who were in marketing at Digital went over to work for Syncom, and I think they're the ones that told
all right.
them.
Okay.
It was Marco, I don't remember his last name. Anyhow,
We can fill that in later.
if I can come up with his name. Anyhow, Marco and Alyssa were the two people. I don't remember either of their last names. So we started up this group, and all the people who were worked for me at DEC, left DEC, and came over to work at Syncom.
Now, was there any repercussions on that, or
No,
were they all basically being laid off anyway? Or
I don't know, actually,
but they all came over.
but they all came over.
So how big a group was that?
About 10, 12.
Okay, and you set up a shop in Colorado Springs.
Right in the technical center there at Rock Rimmon, back
Okay.
in the back. We had our building up in there, and they set us up pretty well. And so then we'd go back and forth to Cincinnati, and for meetings and such, and doing whatever
And
trade shows.
were they the sole owners, or was
Yeah.
there kind of a split in equity?
No, it was
So they
Syncom.
owned it. Okay, so that was their thing.
Right. And again, it's funny. It's like you talked about the database wars and the stuff that went on. I mean, I wasn't involved in that, but there's always politics and stuff that was going on. So I don't know what all the politics were at Syncom, but sometime about 2 years after we'd started this and gotten it going, they laid the whole group off.
Had you achieved any revenue at all by that point?
I don't think so.
Okay, so they laid the whole group off.
The whole group off, and I mean the company basically shrunk right back up into Cincinnati, and I never really heard much about them ever again.
Did they keep any ownership of the IP, or did they just give that?
I don't know whether they kept ownership. As I said, I never heard anything about it. It was one of these stealth kinds of things. They came in. I knew they were coming in to have a meeting, and I had a gut feel they were coming in to close the place down. So I told all my folks, if there's anything here that you have in your office or on your system that you want to keep, I suggest you take it out of here tonight before you go home.
Oh, well, you knew eminently.
I just had this gut feeling,
Yeah.
Tom. And I was right. They came in the next day and shut the place down and took all the computers and everything away.
They took all the equipment.
Everything. Boom.
Huh?
It was just, that was it. And everybody got 2 weeks and you're out on the street.
So what happened to that group? Did they just disperse?
Yeah, they dispersed and people eventually got jobs in different places. Some here, some moved around.
And you went back to DEC at some point.
Yeah, shortly after that, I went back to DEC. Because, again, this was in Bob Rennick's group.
Yeah. Okay.
And Bob Blackledge ran the HSC, or the array controller development.
Right.
And they had come to an agreement that Bob was going to leave and need to hire somebody to manage that group.
Oh, so you're going to basically replace Blackledge working for Rennick.
Right.
Okay.
And Laura Woodburn was involved because she would be the overall manager, reporting to Bob Rennick.
Okay. Oh, so they were going to put Laura in replacing Blackledge, I guess.
No, me replacing Blackledge.
Okay, but
But all the groups reported to Laura.
got it. All right. Okay. All right. Okay. All right,
So they
got
had
it.
all the different groups.
I don't really remember her very well. Can you tell a little about Laura?
She was out of the VMS world,
She was VMS. All right.
so her background was that. It was around the time the Storage Fellowship was just starting. I was no longer working for Syncom, and Richie was going over to Venice for this Storage Fellowship, the very first meeting they had.
Okay.
And I'm like, great, I'll go with you. It'll be fun. I'll go tour around. No. It won't be any fun. It'll be all work. You'll be bored. But I'm going to Deck World afterward in New Orleans. You can come to that. So they went off to Venice, had a great time. And, of course, those storage fellowships, it was perfectly fine to have spouses involved in some of the activities. They all came back with the flu. And then we went off to New Orleans. And I was there. I interviewed with Laura in New Orleans got the flu.
So you
and
went back
spent-
there as a spouse, not as an employee.
to do right, but to interview with
To be
Laura
on the-
because we'd be there.
Yeah, right.
And Bob Rennick was very interested in having Laura hire me, so she felt like she needed to interview me. Well, it turns out we got along great and everything. And then I got the flu.
And you got sick too. Huh?
I got the flu. They all got over it. I got the flu, but I got the job and ended up coming back to digital.
All right, well, we took a quick break there, but just to get recalibrated again, so when did you actually interview with Laura and rejoin DEC?
It was in the summer of 1994, and I was on board in digital in August of 1994, running the array controller team.
And so you're literally back in the storage group.
Or
you're in the storage group for the first time.
As a storage person, not as a database person.
Reporting to Laura, reporting to Bob Rennick, to
Right.
Charlie. Charlie's still there.
Right.
Okay, and tell me a little bit about that experience, because now you're in the controller group.
Right. Right. Well, it was a really fun and interesting experience. I mean, I knew a little bit about the technology.
Well, you
obviously,
were married to a guy who knew a lot about
from
controllers.
from hanging around,
Right.
but it was a group that was pretty dysfunctional.
Was it?
Yeah. Again, along with the digital philosophy of, you keep people head banging and you'll get the best stuff out of them. The way that group was managed, the hardware and the software teams never really talked. I mean, they didn't meet on a regular basis. They would, if there was a problem, they'd get together. And so that they were conditioned to, we've got a problem, I better go beat up so-and-so. So one of the things I did was just start having regular meetings, like once a week at least.
Just to get people to talk to each other.
Just to have them be in the room with each other and not kill each other. Know that they could sit there and ended up building a very compatible group. Completely changed the culture
Did you have to change the people or just the culture?
Just the culture.
Okay.
I feel like that was pretty good to be able to move that culture from one that was so antagonistic to a team that was pretty collaborative and cooperative.
Now, just again to get calibrated, we're talking 1994. This was the HSZ, I think Richie called it, controller system for StorageWorks.
Yeah.
We're not talking about the old DSA storage stuff
Right.
that was used in the 80s.
Yeah, that was still part of
Right.
the...
They're still part of storage, but
Yeah.
you're working on the new stuff in the open system world, essentially.
Yes.
Commodity hardware and to a large extent, at least disk drives and so forth, and new software system to take you forward.
New host systems to connect. So we were building the array controllers that could connect to other systems, IBM systems, etc. So it was an open array controller.
And that actually moved DEC into a very interesting position, and now is one of the larger OEM suppliers
Yes.
in a business that they had always been completely proprietary for only
Yes.
themselves.
Yeah. So we had an OEM business group that was at that time run by Mark Lewis, who was a peer of mine.
Right.
And so Mark would bring in requirements from OEM customers. He and I would talk about how to build that into the HSZ. And then I would do the engineering and we'd deliver the product to him and to other people as well.
Okay. Talk a little bit about that relationship, because Mark is something we'll probably want to talk about a little later. I know Mark really well. I actually hired him in the DEC way back in about,
Did you?
about
Okay.
84, yeah.
Yeah, he and I got along pretty well, for the most part. There was obviously some engineering tensions and things that would go on, but I was his supplier, and so we had to work together pretty closely.
So his job was basically business development, essentially.
Well, but he got into a lot of the technology.
Yeah,
He
right.
had to understand the technology in order to be able to talk about what we might need in the product for him to be able to OEM it to other people.
Yeah, well, that makes sense. Well, he was hired as an engineer and started out in the packaging group, basically, for the HSCs and the
Yes.
and the DSA stuff, and learned a lot about that. But then he moved on into other
OEM.
areas and got to really understand the whole overall architecture and technology beyond just the packaging pieces.
Right.
Which by that time was being done by Ruben Martinez.
Yes.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So
And
they-
eventually, several years down the road, Mark replaced me in the array controller group.
Yes, he did. And later became general manager at one point, as did you. All right, so let's talk about that experience, because that you turned around a controller group fundamentally by getting a good culture in the group with the
Yeah.
same people.
Yeah.
And how long did that take?
I mean, it began, over time, and I just made it clear to people, here's what I'm doing and here's why. We're going to meet because you guys usually meet and have fights. We're going to meet and conduct normal business. And you're going to know what's going on in software, and you're going to know what's going on in hardware. And we're going to converse about it and how it works together to get a product. I was very upfront about telling them what I was doing and why, and what my expectations were. And if they didn't want to go for that ride, that's okay. I'll help them find another job.
Well, did most of them buy in right away, or did it take a while to get them to really kind of decide to sign up for this new?
They had no choice
approach?
but to participate from the beginning. But
You made it pretty clear, in other words.
yeah, I mean, it wasn't a secret what I was doing or why.
Right.
And I think they certainly understood that what they were currently doing wasn't working real well.
Who are some of the people in that group you want to talk about?
Well, Diana Shen,
Okay, I know who Diane is. I don't know her well, but I know she was very good.
yeah, she ran the software team.
Okay.
And she was a stickler for details and following things. And she happens to be Chinese by birth, and so she has that whole Chinese culture of loyalty. So she probably had the hardest time of anybody deciding that it was not Bob Blackledge, but me. And we were going to be going forward that way. But we became good working colleagues and good personal friends. I mean, we still see each other today.
Wow.
Yeah. So it was harder for her. And that was also, Steve Sikola worked for her. And Steve was her architect.
Okay, so Steve was working for Diane, and
Right.
Diane was working for you.
Right.
Okay, all right.
Right.
Who was running? Who was actually doing the? She was doing software, right? Who was doing the hardware side of the
A
controllers?
guy named Jim, and I can't remember his last. I've been trying to remember his last name.
Well,
It's,
we'll find it. We'll get you a chance to pick that, put it in later. But Jim, anyway.
Yeah.
And was he a pretty good, strong guy?
Pretty good, pretty strong. Not as strong or detail oriented and just driven as Diana.
Okay.
But he was a good guy.
And was the hardware pretty unique, or was it just commodity stuff assembled in a certain
I think
configuration
there was
that made sense?
It was unique. There
Okay.
were some unique parts of it.
So what happened once you got that controller group straightened out? Does that really start to ignite the StorageWorks OEM business?
I think probably it helped ignite some of the OEM business, but we were out talking to lots of people and demoing the systems, and it wasn't just the OEM group. I mean, we were showing it in a multi-vendor environment. We were, demonstrating it, writing papers, and so on. And there was a lot of resentment, though, from the other storage groups that we were selling our stuff outside of digital.
Right.
And that caused some abrasiveness with some of the storage groups.
Right, and just to calibrate again, the storage groups in those days, as almost everybody else in internal engineering, their customer base was digital's sales force, basically.
Yeah.
They didn't sell outside of the sales force, they sold through the sales force, so their customer was DEC.
Right.
Right. So there's some resentment about the people that were still playing that game, and you're doing something different.
And
you're selling
they
to
had
DEC's competitors in some sense, or at least their
oh
competitors.
yes, and they had to buy their equipment from us.
Okay.
So when they sold something, money came back to us.
Okay.
Just like with all the other people, and we were incented at that time with certain goals, and if you made your goals, then people got bonuses within the storage teams or within
And
digital.
that was unique within storage for your group to be doing that, and the other people?
No,
didn't?
no, what happened within digital.
Oh, so
People
everybody had incentives. Okay. at that
yeah,
point.
but we're the only group that made it 100% every time.
Wow. There could be some resentment on
There
that.
was some resentment there because we were successful. We, met our financial goals. We exceeded them, and when I eventually then ended up with the VP position of storage, such a wonderful team. So I can talk about that when we get there.
Now, let's kind of make the next transition. So you're working for Laura's working for Bob. Bob's working for Charlie. We're in 94, 95, that time frame. You're getting your team straightened out. You've got this new HSZ controller for the StorageWorks stuff starting to move along. You're starting to make money, and your people are getting paid. I understand there was some resentment at the systems level about you guys doing this work besides the storage guys, right? Because they thought storage should belong to systems.
That's right.
Tell us about that.
Well, that was the big war that happened, and there was probably like what you did with the database. There was at some point the two groups faced off against each other, and had to present. Everybody was involved in presenting stuff. I wasn't, because I was done.
Well, that was actually a limited number of people who did it, but it was a total face-off, right?
Right, and Bob Rennick ran the storage group, and the people who worked for him all presented and talked, and then there was the system people, and the decision was made that storage was going to report to systems.
Which would have been a complete change from history at that. Right.
Yes, and so the storage people pretty much just resigned, left, whatever, en masse. The senior level people. Bob Rennick went over to Networks. And then the marketing people, I'm not sure where some of them went, but all the people who ran the groups, they were not going to report to systems, period. So, and I think Harry Copperman was running there were a couple people in there. Jesse Lipcon was in there.
Jesse had part of the
system. And he reported to Harry Copperman.
Okay.
And so I think it was Harry who maybe made the decision. But anyhow, a lot of the senior people in storage left and went to other groups. I know Bob went to Networks, and that bumped Laura up to running storage.
Okay.
And Laura did it for about 6 months and then left digital, which was then the opening that they needed a new person to run the storage. And that person would have the storage group and report to Jesse Lipcon. So people that you would have known, I think, like Bob Passmore.
Oh yeah, I know all those
Dave
names.
Coombs.
I also know Jesse real well too.
So Bob Passmore, Dave Coombs, Dick Search, and then a couple of outside people were all applying for the job. And of course, they'd all been around storage forever. And Jesse called me up. He said, "Are you going to throw your name in the hat?" I said, "Well, I didn't think it would really work. I lived in Colorado, and I really wasn't prepared to move back east." He said, "You don't have to move." He said, "I'd like to encourage you to apply."
Wow. So he invited you to apply for this job reporting to him.
Correct. He did. He called me up personally.
Okay.
And I don't know, maybe he had some feelings about working with these other guys from past, whatever, but he asked me to apply. So I said, well, okay. So I threw my hat in the ring. And along with everybody else, went through all the same interviews. We had to interview with many different people. And at the end of that process, I know it was a Sunday, I remember I got a call from Reed Chapman. He calls me up and says, "Well, congratulations, Vice President." I'm like, "What?"
Now, just again to get
totally shocked.
How many vice presidents were in DEC, female vice presidents were there at DEC at that time?
Maybe 2 or 3 others.
Yeah, that's about my remembers. Yeah. And several have been vice president for a long time.
Yes.
And I think they came more from the marketing sales world than they did from the engineering world. So you were probably the first vice president, female vice president in the engineering side, right?
There was somebody else. I can't remember her name, but anyhow.
But there could have been more than one.
No, I don't think there were too many. No.
So you became a vice president of storage, reporting to Jesse.
Yes.
Okay.
And they announced it to me, and I know one of the first phone calls I got. I have to tell you this because Dick Search called me up.
Okay.
He called me up early Monday morning, and he said, "I'm not going to lie to you. I spent most of my weekend getting drunk when I found out I didn't get the job, because I really wanted it. But," he said, "regardless of that, I'm going to do everything I can to make you and us successful."
Fantastic.
I'm like, "Wow, that's great, Dick." And he did. He really did. He was fabulous to work with like that.
Now, what piece
That-
of the business was he working on at that point, or engineering?
Some of the marketing.
It was marketing,
piece.
okay.
There was another employee, I won't tell you the name, I could, but who called me up and told me, "You're never going to succeed. You don't have the background. You don't have." It was somebody else who'd interviewed.
Okay,
You don't
so
have
you
the
did have-
background. You don't have the experience, and you're going to go down in flames.
Wow.
Yeah, very direct.
Okay, I guess that's about as direct as you can get.
Well, you know, not everybody liked the fact that somebody who hadn't been around storage as long as they had was suddenly bumped up to
Wow.
this job.
I would agree with that, and I would also probably observe that not everybody was happy with the fact that a female got the job.
Oh, yeah. You know, and for me, I was bumped up like 2 or 3 levels. I mean, it was
Yeah, you definitely were.
boom.
Yeah, right.
Right, bumped right up, and working for Harry, and working for Jesse. And so I started going back to Jesse's staff meetings and working on things with him. And about 3 months later, Harry called up Jesse and me and said, "I've just become really aware of the storage business." He said, "You know, you make a lot of money." I'm like, "Yeah, we make a lot of money. You know, we were responsible for a great deal of digitals,
Oh, absolutely.
probably like 30-some% of." And I also just given a presentation of the board of directors and explained to them how much money we made, how much of it came from service, how much blah, blah. And so a lot of people were suddenly like, "Oh, wow, look at this." He said, "I'm not sure it makes sense to have a business that's that big reporting to another business," which wasn't that big. And he said to me and to Jesse, "What do you think?" And I said, "Well, I think it makes sense for storage to be a separate business." Jesse goes, "Oh, no." And Harry said, "Well, why don't the two of you try to talk it out?" So Jesse and I mean, we had a pleasant conversation, but I never agreed that storage should stay in systems. And Harry came back to us and said, "Well, have you come to any conclusion?" And said, "Well, Jesse still thinks this, and I still think that." And we each had our reasons why. And Harry made the decision to pop out storage.
So that
So
experiment
then-
of putting storage under systems only lasted about 3 months.
Yeah, and now I reported to Harry.
Wow.
And that was another,
Not early. So you made about 3 or 4 level changes there in a very short amount of time.
yes, I did. Yes, I did. And I really enjoyed working for Jesse. You know, he had a different management style, but would challenge me in different ways to think about things. And I enjoyed working for Harry Copperman. Harry decided to take me on in a role of being a mentor. And so whenever I'd go back for meetings, he would have me come in a day or 2 early and spend a couple of hours with him. And we would talk about things like, he said, "What I want you to think about is, where do you want your business to be in 10 years? Now let's back it off to 5, and then to 2, and then start setting our goals now so that we can see the path." And had me think about ways to grow the business and grow it toward an eventual goal. So he was, you know what I mean? He helped me set up
Yeah.
a structure and think about ways, think about it. And I always appreciated the fact that he really wanted to take that time with me and was willing to mentor me because I jumped up so much.
Now, I never met Harry to my knowledge, nor I remember him, but the bottom line is it sounds like that was a really positive relationship.
For me,
And
it
he
was.
a big help for you.
Yes, it was a really good thing for me. Other people I know who worked for Harry didn't like him at all. But for me, he had decided, you know, here was this person that got bumped into this role. She's got a big responsibility. Let me help her grow into taking it further.
Okay.
And so it was quite positive for me working for Harry.
And who was reporting directly to you at that point then? Was Mark working for you?
Mm-hmm. Was Mark on I don't know if Mark was on my staff at that point.
So he's still down level.
He's still down another level at that point. But I had all the other major functions of storage reporting to me.
So that included tape
Extremely.
and well, tape was gone. They said,
Right.
yeah, Charlie got rid of tape. So basically, it's basically all disk and
Marketing
and systems.
Yeah.
Yeah, storage systems.
Well, yeah, I don't think we didn't know
And you weren't
discs
doing
had
your own
moved.
discs either. You're buying those.
Discs had been moved out.
Yeah, so you're basically doing just storage integration of systems, and
Yeah.
software.
Hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, we had the storage management software.
Right.
We had the VMS-based storage products, the open storage products. Yeah, then I had marketing, manufacturing. I had a fabulous staff.
So who was your key people you can remember?
Dick Search is one of them.
Okay.
Kirby Wadsworth
I know him.
also worked for me. I think Dave Coombs was on my staff. One person I'm blanking on her name.
Was Diane still on your staff?
Diana?
Yeah.
No, she
the controller
was.
person?
She reported to the engineering manager.
Okay, so she's still in the organization but down. Okay.
Yeah, but down.
Okay.
So, I just remember an extremely supportive group, and some of the best part were all the storage specialists worldwide. I mean, we genuinely worked as a worldwide team. And if Asia was falling short, people in Europe would say, well, let me see if I can goose up this part and we'll get us to, and we got to our goals all the time because people helped each other, supported each other. When we would just meet once a month and talk about this stuff, and it was a very functional organization. A real pleasure to work with all those folks.
Well, sounds like you had a lot to do with that. Now, Richie could not report to you at that point. So
Right.
tell us about that.
Yeah, he was on my staff, yeah. Well, everybody knew he couldn't really report to me, so that's when Bill Strecker called him up and asked him to be part of the CTO staff for digital, and then assigned him to work for storage.
So he basically pulled him out of your organization
For
technically,
managing.
and then put him right back in virtually
Right,
from his staff. Okay.
yeah,
But that cleared that whole problem of
yes.
nepotism there.
Well, yeah, I don't want to manage him. I don't want to do his reviews. On the other hand, we used to have a good time visiting customers.
Oh, the two of you. That would have
Yeah.
been really interesting to watch that.
Because we'd go in and we'd kind of do our discussions with customers like the Bickersons, kind of
Yeah.
bickering about things. And Richie would inevitably, did he ever tell you how we'd start out those conversations?
He actually said a little bit about this morning. Yeah, but go ahead.
About that we don't know which one of us slept our way to the top.
Right.
He'd tell that to customers. That would break the ice, and I would be horrified.
Wow.
But
So, are we now up to the point where the compact deal is going to happen?
yeah, now the compact deal is going to happen.
Okay, tell us how that all evolved and
So it was
what happened there.
it was the day after the Super Bowl win by the Denver Broncos.
Okay, that you remember.
Well, because we came into work and everybody's celebrating.
Yeah.
But meanwhile, I'd gotten a phone call at 5 or 6 in the morning to tell us that Compaq was buying digital.
And you didn't know anything about that up to that point?
No, I did not.
Okay.
But I was at the senior staff level.
Right.
That I was one of the people that got the phone call and got on. And so I'm going into work, and there's the whole crew is celebrating. Yay, in Colorado. And we have to tell everybody that Compaq has bought digital.
Yeah, they're celebrating the Broncos' victory, right?
Yes, correct.
So what happened when you told them that? I assume that kind of hushed the crowd a little bit.
I probably did, it's nobody knew what the impact of all of that was going to be. And then sometime after that, all the meetings began to do the transition and figure out what the organizations were going to look like and who was going to report to who and so on and so forth.
And again, at that point, we're still at the point where DEC only had 3 or maybe 4 female vice presidents.
Oh, yeah.
Out of whatever number of vice presidents they had, which at that point is probably at least 60 or more.
Probably, I don't know.
Yeah, something, it might have been 100, because I remember when I joined DEC way back in '81, they only had 30. And they kept it there for a long time. But then they kind of opened up the floodgates and created a lot of vice presidents. But
I never
there's
counted.
still very few females.
I never counted.
Yeah. All right. So tell us about that experience. Now you got you're going back and forth to Houston or whatever, and trying to figure out how to combine these two groups.
How to meet with all of these
Right.
groups, and we'd sit down and have these staff meetings, and the people from Compaq would come in, and there were like 4 people, I think, on the staff, all men, of course, and my staff. I had 2 women who reported to me.
Okay.
Anyhow, and so we'd be sitting there, and these guys, they would tell jokes and stories. So we're sitting there, and I remember one of them spoke up and said, well, here's how we treat our customers. We decide if they're going to be our sister, our wife, or our lover.
Oh, wow.
That's the level at which they're trying to interact with us. And, you just sit there and you go, how do I respond to this?
Yeah. Well,
Can you object? So I tried talking to people offline about this is a little objectionable in our culture. And the personnel, there was one woman who was an HR person who would come occasionally to the meetings from Compaq, and she'd go, oh, honey, you just don't understand how we treat our people down here. I'm like,
Well, the Compaq at that point, I assume, was 100% male upper echelon, right?
Mm-hmm.
So vice president and
Oh, yeah.
even below that.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. And then they eventually put us all together. I would say that the person who was my peer on the Compaq side was an extremely nice guy. And he and I talked a lot and talked about how we might work things out. But then he left Compaq.
Was that did he run the storage group at Compaq?
Yes.
And their storage in those days was significantly different than your storage.
Yes.
They were down at the PC.
Oh, yeah. New product every time. No product longevity, no compatibility.
Right.
And they didn't think about that kind of stuff.
Didn't have any software, didn't have any management software, any of that stuff.
No.
Right.
So then it's like, who's going to run the storage group? And they ended up picking Howard Elias, who ran Digital's PC group.
Right.
And he was one of the people that he and his team just had major resentments against storage because they had to pay us.
Oh,
So
so
he
he
was
was still unhappy about
Oh,
the past history
yes.
of the pass-through money back, and you guys get the lion's share or whatever. But,
Yeah.
wow.
So he ends up running the group. And, but he knew all the people I always looked at it like he knew all the people at Compaq. He had worked there, I think, maybe at one
Oh,
point.
so
He's
he
like-
actually had a background. Okay.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
so they picked him, the PC guy. And he had a completely different philosophy from me. I remember having a discussion with him at one point. I told you that we had a really compatible group of people that would work and support each other. He told me I was managing my team completely wrong, that I need to be beating up those salespeople and storage specialists to get them out there to make their money. And I'm like, no, I don't, But he had a completely different philosophy that you pounded on people. And I believed more in collaborative and cooperation. So he and I did not see eye to eye. We had never seen eye to eye. And he gave me the position of running the VMS-related part of the business.
The VMS part of the storage business?
Correct.
Okay, so just basically the old
Yes.
line,
Yeah.
not the new
And the new stuff, he gave all of that to Darren Thomas,
stuff. Okay.
who came out of Compaq.
Right. So you were peers at that point then?
Darren and I were
So
peers.
Darren basically got part of what you were doing, plus what Elias had been, or what the other guy had been doing, that Elias replaced, that left. The guy that
Yes,
died. And
yeah.
you ended up with just basically the legacy stuff.
That's right.
Wow.
Yeah,
And you didn't even have a Unix piece of it. You just had the VNS piece of it.
correct.
So it's totally legacy.
Yes.
It's a big legacy because that's the HSC and all that
Oh,
stuff, but
oh.
it's still the old stuff.
Yeah, not only is it a big legacy, but it was the part of the business where the banks and regulated pieces of our customer base relied on our storage.
Oh, absolutely. That's the enterprise
And-
business. Absolutely.
And if they didn't if we lost data or did anything like that damaged the business, they got huge fines from the government.
Right.
So the reliability and continuation of our products and so on was extremely important to them. So, I mean, it was a significant part of the business, but it wasn't the part of the business that I had built and all of that.
Well,
But,
plus the impact of what you're just talking about, of any kind of a problem,
yeah.
was orders of magnitude different.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I mean, you lose a PC, you don't lose a business.
Right.
You lose an operating VMS system, and you got a major problem, especially you lose data.
Yes.
Which is very rare anyway, but once
Right.
it happens, it's major.
So
All right,
I focused on that and worked on the customer base. Howard and I never really got along.
Okay.
You know, I mean, if I wanted to have a meeting with him, he basically wouldn't take the meeting and things like that. You know, I don't know, maybe it's because I had the business before him.
Well,
You know, there's always
it
that.
could be any. Well, he didn't actually have your business before him, right? Because
but-
he was in the PC world.
Right.
Yeah.
He had only PCs,
Yeah, just PCs, right.
but now he was running the part that I ran.
Yeah, all right.
So anyhow, it never really worked out in it, and it
Now,
was just
Charlie was gone by this time.
Oh
right?
yeah, Charlie was long gone.
So who was in charge of the All right. Okay. So basically, when Grant left, did the PC group stay under Charlie for a while? So when Charlie left, the PC group ended up over to Elias. Is that what happened?
I'm not really sure.
Okay, because Grant left in '92,
Yeah,
and he had the PCs in the storage group at that point.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure.
Yeah, as on his direct reports.
Yeah, no, I really don't know. And for me, at that point, I was uncomfortable enough with where I was that I knew I had, you know, a golden parachute in that if I didn't end up in the same position that I had, this was written into the agreement, that if you got a new job in Compact and it was not the same job that you had in digital, like less responsibility, etc., you could leave and all of your stock options and everything would become good.
All right. Well, that's a pretty good deal. All right.
Yeah, they negotiated a fabulous deal. So I didn't have the same job. I wasn't happy. And so you had to pull the cord on the golden parachute within a year, and so I did.
And when was that?
Well, it was a year into it, so whenever the date was that Compaq took over.
Plus a year. Okay.
Yeah,
All right,
that
okay.
a year, that's when I pulled the ripcord and left.
All right, we'll fill that in later. All right, great. All right, we're back. So before we move on to the post-DEC part of your career, I'd like to have you just kind of reflect back on some of the people that you've met over the years, especially at DEC, and maybe even before that have been significant influences to you and people you really respected or you have really learned something from. And just a handful of them, Max, and just let me know who some of these people are.
Sure. I guess if I go pre-digital, Bruce Barra, who was a professor at the University of Syracuse in the Operations Research Department, was certainly somebody who was a mentor and a friend, and a guy who was willing to take a flyer on somebody like me and support me going through getting my PhD all those years.
Was he actually your advisor at the same time, or was he kind of a side advisor? Your PhD
Oh, he was an advisor. Yeah.
So he was basically your advisor as a
Yes, he
PhD
was
candidate.
all the way through.
All the way, okay.
All the way through, and a friend as well.
And did he stay at Syracuse then for a long time?
Yeah, he did. He's probably retired the last 10 plus years ago. But yeah.
Okay.
You
So
know,
how
I'm
about
certainly
DEC? How about
grateful.
some people at DEC?
Some of the people at DEC, well, obviously the biggest character in my life is Richard.
All right, talk a little bit about that. We've already asked Richard about his view of meeting you, but let's get your view of meeting Richard.
Well, when I came in to interview in Colorado Springs, Barry Rubinson had set up a number of interviews for me. And the last interview of the day, which was going to be at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, was with this guy, Richard Lary.
Okay.
And don't be put off by him, because he's probably kind of come in with his hair about 6 inches long and he never combs it. And he probably will have just crawled out of bed.
No, this is
And
Barry telling you this.
Barry telling me this, not to be put off by this guy who's going to come in all disheveled with his hair all over the place and just having gotten out of bed. So that's when I met Richie. Was
Is that how he showed up? Just out of bed and
yeah, he was pretty disheveled.
So Barry's right about that.
Oh yeah, he knew him. And then when I came to work there, we started to become friends and to hang out, and then that grew into something more. Of course,
Absolutely did. Yeah.
Yeah.
But you didn't get married until, was it 89?
Yeah.
And you joined DEC in 81, so you didn't get married.
We
for 8
lived
years.
together for 5 years before we got married.
And I'm well aware of the fact that you had kids at that point, that he basically became a surrogate father and grandfather for their kids, and still is to this day.
Oh, absolutely. He's always been extremely involved with David and Susan, and then subsequently with their families. And he will put it that I came along just when they were teenagers and getting sick of listening to your voice. So he says I got a chance to be a different voice in their lives.
So what's your view of your children's view of Richie? Do they really just feel like this is their real dad? And
I mean, they know their real dad is their biological dad. Okay. Real dad meaning that. But they also know that on a day-to-day basis, and if they want to go to somebody to talk about decisions and so on, the guy they go to is Richie. Right. Their dad just is not.
Has he stayed active with the kids? Is it real dad?
He stayed active in that. I wish he were more active, primarily for their sakes. I mean, I think it's really important to have your dad in your life. Oh, he calls them 1 day a week.
Oh, he does? Okay. And he still is back east, and they're, of course, here now.
He's in Cincinnati. Right. But he just never came to visit or to see them. I think the saddest thing for me is we have 4 beautiful grandchildren. They are just delights. And he's maybe seen them 3 times or 4 times. Wow. And I think that's sad for him and sad for the kids that they didn't at least get to know him a little bit. And
I absolutely relate to that.
Yeah. So but Richie, he'll make a comment about something, and one or the other kids look at me and go, "Nana, is that really true?" Because he will say some outrageous things to the kids. But he's a big kid with them, and he does a lot.
He is a big kid to start with.
He does a lot of things with them.
Absolutely.
He clearly loves them dearly, and I know he believes they've enriched his life a great deal, that he didn't have that opportunity, and he never had children physically of his own. Right. So watching these kids grow up, he would get in there and change diapers and give baths.
Oh, he was doing that too, wasn't he?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Because he never had that experience.
Yeah.
And so he had that experience of raising kids and babies and going to sports games and with these kids, and still does.
And the good news for you guys is you've got both your kids and all your grandkids living out here.
Oh,
very
I feel
close. So you're all in the same neighborhood, basically.
Yeah, they're in Monument. We're here 20 minutes away. Right. Just feel very, very lucky.
Oh, that's great.
So anyhow, so obviously there was Richie.
So who else?
Well, I can't forget Barry Rubinson.
Well, let's talk about Barry Rubinson. We haven't
the
talked
Buddha.
About the Buddha, right?
Yeah.
He's about as round as he is tall.
Yeah. We saw him the last time about 2 years ago on one of our trips. Got together and had breakfast with him. He's living outside of Las Vegas now.
There he is?
He's retired.
Okay. I didn't know where he was. Okay.
Yeah, he's in Henderson, Nevada. And Barry, recruited me into DEC. And he's quite a character.
Oh, absolutely.
And he was very, very good at bringing me into the company and making sure I met people. He took me places, introduced me to people, made sure I got to the right kind of meetings, set me up so I could be successful with meeting a lot of different people. And with customers, too. I mean, we did a lot of things with customers. And he just made sure I learned a lot of things very quickly about the culture and people.
Well, that makes a lot of sense, knowing Barry very well, and actually he was the same with me.
Good.
Yeah, and actually that was the DEC way.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Grant did the same thing. When I first started working for Grant, he made sure I met every one of the vice presidents and all the different divisions. That's just part of the culture. Because it was a very collaborative culture in those days.
Right.
Yeah, very consensus-based. Almost everything was consensus-based.
Yes, it was.
To the point where it almost
like this,
eventually became a problem.
yeah,
You
we either
couldn't
banging
get the
heads
consensus anymore.
banging heads because you had to pick this or this.
Right.
And but yeah, that was Barry, and obviously, he was a big influence for me.
Now Barry actually, after he had the database experience at DEC, went on to become part of the Alta Vista team.
Yes, he did.
And for a while, he thought he was going to end up in a company that would be Alta Vista and be public and all that stuff. And I don't even remember what happened. But
I don't either, but it didn't work.
Yeah, it did not work out. But then he went on to another chip company for a while, and I lost track of him after that.
Right.
But Alta Vista was again a bunch of guys from DEC that had some brilliant idea that eventually got overtaken by Google. But at the time, it was considered the best search engine.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
And he got to California because we hired Jim Gray, and I can.
Let's talk about Jim Gray, right?
I can.
And tell us the background on the whole thing about why Gray's important and how he became part of the group, and et cetera.
Well, when we realized in the database group that we had a lot of good technology, a lot of good people, but we didn't have a named star that was recognized. And if we wanted to build up the group even more, we needed to bring in somebody who had, was more recognized in the industry as star name. And Jim was one of those people.
He and Stonebreaker were probably the two most recognized.
Yeah, Stonebreaker was
technical guys.
Stonebreaker was not leaving the university.
Right.
So I mean, we'd go do work with Mike Stonebreaker, but he was not going to leave the university. But Jim, I think that there was a conference that was held in California, and I think it might. I'm not sure if it was on transactional technology or what, but it was a specially invited conference, and I'm pretty sure that Richie was invited and Barry was invited. And Jim Gray was at that conference. And I remember going to one of the spouse-type functions because I was there with Richie. I was probably out there doing some business and then just hooked up with those guys. But during that conference, I think Barry became aware that Jim wanted to leave Tandem.
Okay.
So Tandem wanted to move him out of San Francisco down to one of their Valley facilities.
He lived underneath the Coit Tower and wasn't going anyplace.
That's correct.
Right.
And so Jim was going to leave Tandem because he was not going to move from the city. He'd left IBM for the same reason to go to Tandem, and now Tandem was, I don't know how many years were in between all this.
Okay.
So we were getting word that Jim was potentially available. And I had connected with him kind of just on and off through database things over the years to say hello, to be in a meeting, nothing really formal. So as a team with Hans Gilstrom's staff, we decided we'd like to go after Jim as an employee. And the one thing that was going to be required was going to be to build him a lab in San Francisco. My biggest fear was that we would start down this path, and then somebody would pull the plug and say, "No, we're not going to do that." So I really pushed hard on, if we're going to go after Jim, it's got to be with a guarantee that you're not going to pull the plug on this thing after we've gone through the recruiting, because that's going to kill your reputation right there.
Yeah.
If you do that, the word will get out and you're dead. So I got the guarantee that they wouldn't do that. And I was the designated person from the database group to recruit him. So I began working with a recruiter who knew about Jim and making trips to California to talk to him about what we could do with digital. And we'd have meetings, but mostly our meetings were spent hiking all over that city.
So he'd take you on a hike.
We go hiking everywhere. And I remember the first time I went out there, I was in heels and stockings and so, I quickly gave that up because it was miserable to try to walk all
Well,
over.
Coit Tower is on a huge hill to start with, and very slope.
Yes.
Very steep slope on it.
Yes. And hills all over the place.
Wow.
So a lot of our meetings were held marching around the city.
Wow. Tell us
And
a little bit
eventually-
about
eventually-
Jim's background. At IBM, he developed, I think, what became SQL, right?
I think he was, I don't really know. I think
Well,
he was
part of the
that.
SQL development, if not the inventor.
Well, he's really responsible for transaction technology and transactions and databases.
Yeah. Okay.
The fundamental thing that you have to make doing any kind of sales or anything where you have to maintain data integrity, he developed the fundamental technology for that.
So he wasn't necessarily the inventor of relational databases per
No.
se. That's the guy Cobb, or whatever his name is. But he did really drive the transactional side of what the
Absolutely.
from a
And
transaction perspective.
all the things that we do today, we wouldn't do without Jim.
Okay.
But he really wanted to have a laboratory in San Francisco and work on product issues. He did not want to do research.
Okay.
He wanted it to be very product driven.
Okay.
So I worked with him through the recruiting process, getting him on board, finding the space where we could build the lab. We wanted to bring in an architect to lay it out, but Jim wanted to do it himself. So he, using tools, laid out exactly what he wanted the facility to look like. And
Where was the facility?
it was above the digital sales office on Market Street in downtown San Francisco.
Okay, down there. Okay, all right. Okay.
Yeah, so, and then we started construction on it, and he joined digital, but worked out of his house for several months. And for the first year while this was going on, I would meet with him, talk with him. I was like his major contact through management into the team. And he was establishing relationships with the RDB people because he really wanted to develop technology to drive into that product. Then during that time, Barry Rubinson decided he wanted to join that team. So he went out and joined Jim. I'm not sure how successful all that was, but that's what took Barry to California. Do you remember Barry Wick from?
Yes. Yes, I do.
Barry went to California to do all of the IT and layout and so on, and worked with Jim just to make sure everything got set up. And then we began hiring people that were part of the team. The one person I especially remember, there were two. Tom Barkley became the overall manager, and he was somebody Jim knew from before. And Mike Ubell. Mike is related to Paula Hawthorne. Paula was a student of Michael Stonebreaker's.
Oh, wow.
And Paula and I knew each other because we were one of the few women.
In the whole world, in that business, right?
So I knew Mike through Paula through.
Okay.
Anyhow, so he had a team of about 8 people built up by the time we formally opened the lab.
Okay. All right.
And then they proceeded on to do the things that they did.
So talk about a couple of things they accomplished.
I don't know anything specific to tell you about with the product because shortly after that, the group transitioned over to report to, they didn't report to me anymore.
This is Robert Taylor you went to?
I don't know, somebody in the database group they reported to.
Oh, okay. All right. But
Or
not,
maybe directly to Hans, but
Okay,
it
all
was
right,
no
okay.
longer,
so it didn't report to you at that point. Okay.
no, it didn't report to me because that was the same point at which Diddley had become successful.
All right. All right.
And so I'm busy off launching the Diddley stuff. And, he had his stuff established. And he could certainly direct his own work. He didn't need any part of me to do that.
Did Jim have any interest in Diddley?
No,
He did. Okay.
no.
That was
No.
not something he was going to go get involved in. As far as
No.
I'm concerned, that's on the sidetrack. Okay.
Well, I mean, I'm sure he would have gotten involved, but he would love, anytime we'd go out there, discussions between Richie and Jim were fast-paced and moving. It's just, you can imagine.
Yeah.
Those two brains. And they'd often talk a lot about storage-related issues, things that Jim wanted to understand and how it might relate to the things he was doing and future technology. And again, we'd be doing this on hikes. And
Right.
Donna, his wife, would be with us. And so Donna and I would end up talking about other stuff. And Richie and Jim would be off. And again, we're marching all over the city.
As I remember right, Jim got a Corinne Award.
Yes, he
He's
did.
a fellow on just about everything.
Yep.
Considered the top, if not the very top, right in the handful of very top
Yes.
database people of all time.
A tremendous loss.
Had a tremendous amount of impact on global mapping.
Yes.
And eventually it turned into, basically the ability to navigate around the world on
Right.
GPS. I mean, he had a lot
Yeah.
to do with that.
And he was just doing the same thing with regard to the ocean and ocean floors.
Right. Oh,
He'd been doing that for about a year at the time of his disappearance.
Yes, for those
So-
who don't know, tell us a little bit about the disappearance, because this is a pretty sad situation, but it's...
Yeah, it was during the Christmas holidays. I'd have to look up what year for you, maybe about 10 years ago.
Right about that, yeah.
About 10.
And his, I
And-
think his mother had died, right?
His mother died earlier, and he had her ashes.
Right.
And Donna was out of town, and he was taking the sailboat out.
And he was an avid salesman,
Sales-
sailor, and had his own boat.
Oh yeah, and
And
he
been on
lived
the
on a
ocean many
boat.
times, right?
Oh yeah, and he lived on his boat for a while, and so he was taking the boat out. It was apparently a beautiful, gorgeous day. The oceans were calm. And he was sailing out to dump his mother's ashes. And Donna was out of town. She knew what time he left, and then he was never heard
Disappeared
from again.
completely on
Completely,
the face of the earth.
completely.
And they did a worldwide search, which I
Yes.
think is still the biggest worldwide search of
Yes.
an ocean area looking for any kind of debris.
Yeah, Richie helped participate
Almost
in the
all
searches.
volunteer, right?
Yeah,
All
Richie
his
was one of
friends.
them.
Yeah.
He got on and did searching. They'd take these pictures, then put them up on the web, and people who wanted to could go in and search the data that they'd gathered, and nothing.
And never found a trace
No.
whatsoever of the boat, of him, or anything that could be connected to him, right?
Nope. So sad.
Yeah,
I
it really
mean,
is.
Many a night I've awakened and Jim is there. He was somebody I admired greatly, and he was a very warm person in addition to just being brilliant.
Now, at the time that happened, he had already left DEC and gone to Microsoft and worked with Gordon Bell
Correct.
in his lab for a number of years.
Correct.
So they were really close friends.
That's correct.
Right. But when he disappeared, he was a Microsoft employee.
Yes.
Yeah, and many years out of DEC at that point.
Yes. But it's a loss to the world.
Well, there's no question about it. I mean, that's a legend. That whole thing is absolutely a legend. And what a mystery. Will never probably be
Yes.
solved.
No, I don't think so.
So how about some other people at DEC?
Some other people at DEC. Well, I would put Mike Riggle on that
All right,
list.
talk about Riggle a little bit.
He was, he really ran the advanced development group of the technology. I mean, he was brilliant.
Anyway, you want to talk a little about Mike?
Well, he
Your
was,
view of Mike.
he had this person from the database group, and everybody else on his staff was related to things he'd done before. And, but, I was in all of his meetings, and he was just always very straightforward, very honest. I remember him sitting down with me and said, look, I've been around a long time. I've never had women working for me. He said, so if I've ever said or done anything that's insulting or, he said, I don't mean to, I just don't know.
That would be something he would say.
And that's what he said to me
Wow.
about, working for him. And then, obviously we'd be in there. He's the one that insisted, and I've always been grateful, insisted that I learn how to do a budget. And yes, you have a budget support
Oh, that was
person.
something he was actually seriously advocate for. Absolutely.
Right.
Got to have a budget.
Not only do you have to have a budget, but you have to do it yourself. You're not going to just plunk things in and have somebody spit out a budget. You're going to figure out every number and how it relates to everything else. And that was one of the best things I ever learned, because I was always able to just use that information in what I did every day, and just in management. I knew how investing in one thing would affect another, and so on.
And he's telling you something, not something you read about in the book. He's telling us what he does.
Yeah.
He's saying, this is what I do. I go do it myself, so I
Yeah.
understand it 100%.
Yeah, he said, I don't care if you have Sandy there as your person. You will do it yourself. She can help you, but you will do it yourself. And it was an invaluable tool for me throughout my career.
All right, well, great.
So that was
So
my...
a real mentor for you.
Yeah, and not in so much, not in the technology, but just in his style and the way he handled himself and his teams and his fairness and integrity. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, he absolutely had all the above.
right.
So who else? Anybody else you want to talk about?
I could talk about you. I mean, you and I, you and I have intersected at many points in my career. Early on at Digital, and when you took over the database group, calling me up, come on in here, I need to learn about something. So we do that periodically, but then this is getting ahead, but our work together at Infusion and when we interacted and did some projects together.
We'll talk about that in a few minutes.
Yeah, we can talk about that a little bit later.
One other person you didn't talk too much about, actually two, Dave Weckert, who was
Dave
the guy,
Weckert?
the neurologic guy, and then Dave Schrader might be, we'll talk about both of those two again.
Well, Dave Wecker is absolutely brilliant, and he has great imagination and technical ability, and his vision to see the future and to be able to pull together a lot of things in his own work and go out into the research community and bring that in. He was fundamental in our success of many, many of the projects we did within the Advanced Development Group.
Now, did he have some kind of special scientific or medical training about physiology or whatever they got him in the neural networks of all things? Or did he
No,
just come up with that idea to go think about how the brain works?
Well, he's an epileptic.
Oh, so he's got a personal situation.
That's correct.
Okay,
And that got
okay.
him interested in a lot of that stuff and tools and things that would help. So that really got him going on a lot of it.
So he became a self-expert basically because
Exactly.
he was suffering from some of those situations.
Exactly. And he's at Microsoft.
Is he?
He's been there for years and years, but doing their quantum computing in a lead role there and all over the world.
Oh, he's in the quantum computing. They're doing qubits.
Yep.
All that stuff.
Yep, that's what he's doing.
Well, he's way out ahead of the world.
Yeah. Well,
How
that's
about that?
Dave. Dave Schrader, I really wouldn't have much to say about. We really didn't work too closely and on things at all.
All right. Anybody else want to pick up?
Anybody else? Gosh, there's probably a million people. I mentioned the storage staff that I had, and they're really a big part of my ability to be successful in what I did. That team was phenomenal.
All right. Well, you already did that. So let's move on. So let's talk about after DEC. After Compact, actually, after Compact.
After Compact.
At that point, you've now resigned,
Yes.
taken a package,
Yes.
and what'd you do next?
Well, the next thing I did was Mike Peterson called me up and said, "Hey, I have this group called Infusion, and here's what we do. We, hold little conferences, try to put technology people together with people with money, and then use that as a way to get clients and go off and do some consulting." And he had this vision that he would have a bunch of separate consulting groups. We wouldn't be part of the same group, but we were part of the same group. And we could pair up or go in small teams into different companies to work on problems depending what the problem was that the company had. So, and you and I, Tom, did several of those.
Absolutely.
And so at that point, I started a company called Lary.
And that was to have your own little partnership with Richie.
Right. So when we started out, it was just me.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, because he was still working. He didn't leave till about a year after I did.
Okay.
So I got Lary up and running and began to have discussions with Mike Peterson about all this various stuff and started to do some consulting work through that with him. And then Richie joined in.
Okay. So Richie didn't leave until about a year after you left.
That's right.
The guy was a little closer than that, but all right.
Yeah, and so we had in Lary, we did business through Infusion, and then we did business on our own. The really unique thing, I think, is Richie obviously was very well known. I had a few connections too, but we never advertised.
No, we didn't. No, it was all word
We
of mouth.
never advertised and always had as much work as we ever wanted, which was lovely.
Yeah.
Just a lovely way to operate. I would say for Richard and me, one of our biggest clients was Equalogic.
Right.
We were involved with Equalogic probably within a week of when they opened their doors. They called us and asked us to come in, and we worked with them on the technology side. That would be Richie.
And that's because fundamentally the three founders were all
ex-DEC people, and I
right.
worked with them
Right.
as part of the multimedia strategy work that I
Oh,
did.
did you? All right, so that's the connection.
So
All
they
right.
knew, they called me
Okay.
because of, I had the connection there. And I worked with them on a lot of things that were organizational or marketing or just, you know, I didn't work on the technology part, obviously, they had Richie for that. But we were with them from the very beginning to when they went public. And that was a very successful consulting agreement. And satisfying for both of us.
Yeah, they actually didn't go public. They actually got bought
acquired,
just
yes.
as they were in their final,
Yes.
about ready to go.
You're right.
Ring the bell.
Yeah, they got bought.
Yeah.
Was it Dell that bought
Yeah,
them?
Dell bought them. Yeah,
And
Dell bought them
so
for 1.4 billion, as I remember.
it was a big number.
At that day, it was one of the biggest ever,
Yes, it was. It was one of the
especially a
biggest ever.
storage startup.
Yeah, and then through Infusion, lots of interesting engagements with different companies. I was trying to remember what the company name where you and I went. Who's the woman who was running it? It was. I can't remember.
I'm probably not going to be able to help you on that one because I can't remember that. But I do. I think you and I worked together on the one that was working on this system where they could send data out in little bunches and regather it and get it back again. And it was down in Southern California, and eventually it spun out after we told them they ought to use that for database backup.
Yeah.
And that was sold to our friend Mark Lewis at EMC.
Okay. Yeah, well, you and I had several successful engagements
Oh yeah, yeah.
through Infusion and had fun doing that.
Absolutely. No, that's great.
So
Infusion, a lot of fun.
the one moment that always comes to mind when I think about Infusion is I had a teleconference scheduled the morning that 9/11 happened.
Oh, you did? Wow.
Yes. And one of the people who was supposed to be on this conference, it was one of the Israeli companies, his brother was on one of the planes. So it's, it's like he canceled at the last minute because
He just found out.
he just found out his brother was on the plane that crashed into the Twin Towers. So, that's nothing to do with business or anything, but it's just one of those moments that sticks with you when...
Yeah, I knew a guy who I had consulted with who was supposed to be on one of those airplanes and was in Boston at the time and was consulting, was over at the ESG group. And the meeting ran over and he missed the plane.
God.
And he was an Israeli. So he did not end up in the crash, but he should have been. He was on that airplane, at least booked on an airplane. So, wow.
Yeah, so that kind of connection's a little...
One thing I forgot to mention in Richie's interview, and I'll just put it in there just for background, is Michael Peterson, who's we've been talking about. Mike Peterson is one of the guys that created probably more organizations in the storage world than anybody, single person. But his biggest win was SNIA.
Yes.
SNIA. He created that himself.
Yes.
And that now is by far the biggest structured organization within storage on trying to do things right about almost every technical issue you want to talk about and trying to lead the pack and where they're going with future virtualization versions or whatever, containers, all that stuff. And he started that.
Well, and I have a connection there too.
Okay.
The connection is that it was during the time when I was managing storage that got off the ground. And Roger Reich
Right.
was our representative, came to me and told me about SNIA and said, I think that we should get involved with SNIA.
Okay.
Because we weren't involved. And I told him, yes, go do it. And that was the start of digital storage involvement with SNIA.
And ultimately, SNIA ended up in the DEC building for a while.
Yeah.
Their
Yes.
headquarters. And they think they're still out here in Colorado, but I'm not positive.
Yeah, they are still out here in Colorado last I knew on Garden of the Gods
Is that where they are?
Road,
Okay.
in an area out there. And I consulted for them. It's not on my resume or anything, but I've consulted for them over the years several different times on different projects.
All right. Anything else about the Infusion experience you want to talk about?
No, I mean,
Okay.
we had a great time doing
Oh, we
it.
definitely did. I mean, it actually only lasted about 4 years for me.
Right,
I
same
ended
for
up,
me.
getting a full-time job, and a couple other guys did too, right about that time, and the organization kind of broke up and fell apart.
Yes.
But that 3 or 4 years was a lot of fun. A lot of
Oh.
smart people and did a lot of interesting things.
Yeah, we did. And when we'd get together, we'd have very interesting
Oh,
discussions, and it was a lot of fun doing that.
All right, now we've already covered with Richie the background of Xiotech and Steve Sokola leaving DEC and starting the ISE group and then Seagate and so forth and coming together when Steve Lusso finally realized he could no longer continue to try to have a channel conflict and be successful. And also the fact that then they decided to kind of merge the group, and guess who got named the general manager of that group?
Me.
Let's talk about that.
Well,
Experience.
prior to that, during the time that they were still affiliated with Seagate, I was doing a significant amount of consulting for them.
Oh, you were? Okay.
But yeah, I was
Okay,
involved on a
okay.
very regular basis. Richie was involved, and I was involved. And I did a lot of, they were trying to figure out what the product should be and how to position it with this ISE technology and how customers would accept it. And so I did a lot of in-depth customer interviews for them with people from what became the XIO group. We'd go out in pairs and spend a day with people and to describe the product and ask a bunch of questions. And so I helped develop the whole strategy and to verify it with customers for what became the ISE.
Okay. So you actually were involved with the early
Yes,
definition
sir.
of what ISE was.
Yes.
At any point did you also get involved in the conversation about how you make a business out of this when you're competing with your own customers?
No.
So that
Was
not-
never discussed.
It was never discussed
Never discussed.
because it was obvious. It was an obvious problem right from day one.
Right.
In fact, I
But it was
told
never-
Lusso that first time I saw this thing that you're never going to be able to sell this.
Right. So then when they decided to make it part, when Xiotech decided to buy it, they needed somebody to run the group out here.
Right.
And Steve Sokola actually suggested that I ought to be that person. Introduced me to Casey Powell.
Now, who was the CEO?
Yes, and Casey interviewed me and offered me the job. And I had to take, my job was to figure out, well, first of all, it was broad, but the first thing was to figure out who from the current group would come forward and join Xiotech. Because they had room for, I think, about 15 or 20 people fewer that were on board.
Okay.
So Casey wanted it run like a safety boat kind of interview where if you were out there and had to pull people into the boat with you, who would you pull in?
Yeah, right. Toss them all in the water and see who's kicking back.
Yeah,
In order.
that's right.
Right.
And so my job was to go through and, in the time we were getting the group together, first of all, interview everybody there, which was great because I got to know people a little bit, and a lot of them knew me from DEC, etc. Find out what their opinions were of people, get people to, it's hard, but okay, if you're going to be sharing the pot of money with all these people, who do you want on board?
Right.
Because not everybody can come on board. And then to make offers to the people that we selected.
How big was the group at that time?
It was over 100 people.
Over 100. And how many could you accommodate?
It was something in the 80s, I think.
So you had to cut 20% or so,
Yeah,
or more. Okay.
yeah, and then offer them jobs. And everybody we offered a job to came. I didn't have anybody leave, which I thought was great. And then sort of introduce and enforce the Xiotech culture. Because this was a pretty freewheeling place.
Yeah. Well, you're talking now about the Minneapolis culture, right?
Yes, to hear some of
and
the
what's
corporate...
become the DEC guys going over to Seagate mostly.
Yes.
And now you're going to get the Xiotech influence.
Yes.
Okay.
And there were certain things that happened, like, there were a lot of secret deals that were behind the scenes. And, how come that person gets to work at home and I don't? And how come this? And there were just all these secret deals going on. So it was basically having to say to people, no, you can't work at home all the time. You have to be here. There's certain core hours you have to be here. and trying to tell people that there were just fundamental changes that were going to be happening. And if you didn't want to do that, that's okay. You don't have to accept the job. But if you accept the job, here are the things that are going to be different. Again, my way of doing these is to just make it right up front.
So it sounds a little bit like what you had to do with the controller group.
Get
a culture established that was going to bring them together rather than keep them separate.
And just make that possible with the group in Minneapolis.
So how successful would you say that was?
There were some successes, and some people just didn't. There was always resentment from Minneapolis to Colorado.
Well, I can always understand that.
So there's a lot of resentment that direction. And people in Colorado were often, they're so backwards out there. Or so, it's probably better than 50-50, but, there's still those fundamental differences remained. And we were run by two separate management teams. I had one team, there was another. And the people who were my peers back there, they were not easy to work with. But, you do what you do.
Now, eventually,
yes,
and maybe after you left, they kind of married those two groups and consolidated in Colorado. But
yes, that was after I left.
Okay.
Yeah. And we were worked together for quite a while, and then it was at the time when sort of the bottom fell out of the market. And we'd been at, I don't remember what conference it was. Casey was there, a bunch of us, and had lined up some financing to carry us forward. And then the bottom dropped out and the financing got pulled. And the company couldn't afford to have everybody. And I had to lay off like 40% of the team in Colorado, which is a lot.
Right.
And I said to them, if we're laying off 40% of the team, you don't need me.
That's right. That's when you put your name on the list. I was thinking of the
Yeah, so it's you don't need me.
Okay.
You don't need a manager, VP out here for this many people. So I left at that point, which saved a few jobs, I think. And they all marched forward, working under a different manager, which this guy was not a particularly quality person, and things were not very good for people in Colorado. They only lasted 6 or 9 months, something like that. And then
How long were you in that role? Were you there more than a year?
Yeah, a couple of years.
Couple years, okay.
And then around that time was when Richie got his diagnosis.
Right.
And so I took that as kind of a side. Then I was able to devote most of my energy to being supportive of Richard and getting him through the medical crisis that we had to go through.
And the good news is he's through it.
Oh, he's through it. He's great.
Doing very well right now. Absolutely.
Yeah, he's doing wonderfully.
Yeah.
So that coincided with that, and then as he got better, he was offered a job back there.
Right.
And name your terms, kind of thing. So.
He asked for his 17 weeks of vacation.
That's correct. And they gave it to him.
Yeah, right. We already heard that story. That's a great story.
Yeah.
So, when you left, what did you do next?
I got involved in a lot of volunteer work.
Okay. All right. Tell us a little bit about that.
I signed up with Pikes Peak United Way.
Oh, all right.
To, I figured I could do some things with them in terms of programs, and I participated in a number of different programs down there, and some of which involved going out into the community. So people would apply for funding from United Way, and you'd go in to hear a presentation, what they wanted to do with the money and so on, and then have to come back, and you've got more requests than you do money, and having to prioritize and decide who gets the money and not, and then periodically visit those organizations. So, I was involved in that part of it.
How long did you do that?
For about 4 years.
Okay.
And after a while, they were also trying to start up a women's leadership council.
Now, United Way was?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
That was very frustrating because I mean, my attitude toward volunteer work is if I say I'm going to do something, I do it on time, etc. And I found that many of the people I was working with, well, this is a volunteer thing, I'm too busy. I didn't get it done. And so when you find yourself going to meeting after meeting, and it's like, okay, here we are again. What's our charter? For the 6th time, I got too frustrated with that and left doing that kind of thing. But meanwhile, I'd gotten involved in starting to do pottery.
Oh, now tell me about that. I hadn't heard that. What about
You didn't
pottery?
know about that?
No.
Okay, so I
You talk
started
about making pottery?
making pottery from scratch with
Okay.
the pottery wheel, and so that's what I spent most of my time doing.
Are you good enough at it that you have shows with this stuff and try to sell some of it, or
I
all
can
just for
sell
yourself?
some of it. No, I can sell some of it if. So I started out taking classes down at the Burniece Art School here at the Fine Arts Center, going to classes once a week in some open studios, and then eventually moved over to another studio called 22nd Street, where what I would find is Burniece would have a class. And there'd be like 5 or 6 weeks between classes, and then the next one would come in it. So it was kind of on and off. And I missed it when I didn't have it. It was especially nice to have a way to involve myself in something when Richie was going through treatments, and I needed a way to take care of me too.
Oh, so this is that's actually was something that was kind of complementary to
Yeah.
what you're going through with Richie's situation.
Yeah.
All right.
So
Makes sense.
I found the 22nd Street Clay, and her classes were on a different schedule in her open studio, so I was signing up for both, so I could get to do clay several times a week. And I did that for a few years, and then I still go down to 22nd Street. I don't go to Burniece. But with a friend of mine, somebody that I met down there who's become a very close friend, was building a studio behind her garage out in the Black Forest area. It's a beautiful 3-room studio with clay and so on. And she asked me to come join her in her studio. And so Richie got me a wheel, and I have my own equipment and stuff, and it's all in residence out there, and I can go anytime I want. And so clay, it fulfills a lot of what I want to do. So I make stuff for us. I make stuff, a couple of my nieces and nephews are starting up new households, and so I'm making them some stuff, and I have fun.
Fantastic.
So that's where I spend a lot of my time,
Did
and
you-
of course with my grandkids.
Yeah, so you spend a lot of time with grandparents. Any more on the technology business world stuff, or have you long since stopped working on there?
Well, I've not done anything for a year and a half, but I left Zyotech, and then they went through a series of vice VPs up until a few years ago when Bill Miller stepped in. And at that point, they asked me to come in and consult with them.
So you're back.
So I was
Consultant.
back. I was back consulting with them. Still able to do my pottery. It's like I can come in every day but Thursday, and so we worked it out. And I helped them get their manufacturing process under control. And then they hired somebody to take that job permanently. And at that point, that was it.
So how long did you do that?
About a year.
Okay, when you say get the manufacturing process under control, you're talking about everything from an ERP system to purchasing and all that? I mean, the
Well, they
whole
outsourced
operational
it.
thing?
They outsourced manufacturing.
Okay.
And so there was this, very complicated relationship with San Mina.
All right, so this is a vendor customer relationship that was
Right.
not working right.
Right, and over the years they'd gotten way out of control to the point where it was like Zyotech would say, this is as an example, not literal.
Yeah.
Zyotech would say, okay, we're going to build 500 systems next quarter. And San Mina would say, they've never taken 500 systems in their life. We're only going to build 200. So then they'd build 200 and get to the end of the quarter and they wouldn't have enough. So then Zyotech would come back and say, okay, 600 next quarter. It was this really broken relationship about how they interacted, and they'd order too many parts and XI would have to pay for them. It was just broken.
So it sounds like there's some fundamental problems on the Zyotech side.
Oh,
of the
yes.
procurement group.
Yes.
Yeah, and understanding what they should be buying and not buying.
Yes.
And
They didn't have any
how to
procurement
manage that
people.
versus a business plan.
Yeah, they
versus
didn't have any
just-
procurement people. So,
Wow, that'd be a serious gap.
so anyhow, I ended up doing that, and
Okay.
because I had managed manufacturing before as part of everything that I did, was something I could step into and help them out.
So, looking back on all that, what are you most proud of?
Well, it's funny, I told you I printed out my resume just to kind of go through and look through some dates and stuff. And I started reading it over this morning. I was like, God, I guess I did a bunch of stuff. I was raised during the time when women didn't really plan for careers. So I never planned for
I
a
went
career.
to college to get married.
Yes,
and
I
maybe
did.
be a nurse or a teacher. That was basically it, right?
Yeah, I got married 2 weeks after I graduated from college.
And you became a teacher.
That's right. So
You were following the script.
I did. I was just marching along, doing kind of what my parents thought I should do, which wasn't what I wanted to do, as I found out.
Right.
But I never really planned, I'm going to have a career and go do this.
Well, you planned you're going to become a PhD
I
in
did.
engineering.
Yeah.
That's a pretty aggressive plan. That's
But
not
as I
just
got
a
into
wish.
the business, it's like I worked hard. And, I think I was sort of in the right place at the right time. And I worked hard and got things done. So I was able to, see a pathway and kind of move my way up.
Well, I mean, I certainly agree with that overall for your whole career, but if I just think about that particular situation where you made a decision, you got 2 young kids, you're in the process of getting divorced, you're now basically living by yourself, to go back to college, to change your career path completely into something as radically different as engineering, and I ultimately became operational research with a PhD from a bachelor's in education. That is not exactly a small plan. That's a big plan.
I never even thought about it. It's
And
just
to
I'm
pull it
going to
off
do
in
it.
5 years, Ellen, that's amazing. That's absolutely amazing.
Well, thank you.
It is. I mean, and I think you should be very proud of that. And maybe you're even prouder of other things like cleaning up the controller group or whatever. But bottom line, that moment right there is a real watershed moment for almost anybody, and especially for someone that grew up in the environment you grew up in as a female and was told what is right to do,
Yeah.
become a teacher, and you even said that your mom at one point said, "Why do you keep doing this? Why don't you just get a job?"
Right, exactly.
Right in the
Get a-
middle of this PhD plan.
Get a 9-to-5 job.
Right.
I'm like, no, I don't think so.
So,
But-
with that in perspective, that's a big deal. That really is a big deal. And I've been very proud ever since I heard what the fundamentals of that story and a lot more about it today. Anything else that really sticks out as something that you really think was a huge accomplishment for you? Obviously, becoming a vice president of storage might
It
be
was
one.
unimaginable
Yeah.
that that would happen to
Right.
me, that I would end up getting that job. No, I'm really proud of getting that job and the job that I did while I was there,
Well, you
because
should. Yeah.
people, threatened me that I was going to go down in flames. And the fact that we were able to meet all of our goals, that we maintained, good margins and made money for digital. I mean, I grew the business from 1.2 billion to 1.8 billion
And
in 2 years.
how long did that take? 2 years? Okay.
2 years, a year and a half, 2 years. So, I mean, I think that's a big deal to
That's
me.
a huge deal. That's 50% in
Yeah.
in 2
In that
years.
time, and I'm proud of the kind of cultures I was able to build, which were collaborative and supportive.
Well, it sounds like you've done that multiple times.
Yeah,
You take
Yeah.
a dysfunctional group and that was not cooperating, was
Yeah.
not collaborating, and turn them into a collaborative organization without changing the people. And
Right.
that's the amazing part. Usually you fix that by changing the people.
yeah. No, I didn't.
Can't get the
change.
culture fixed. Well, put some people in that have the right culture rather than teach these people how to be the right culture. that's a little difficult trick. It's almost like becoming a PhD from a teacher.
So, I think just getting to that point, and I loved having the opportunity in the VP position, because I like working with people and with technology, and with products, being able to bring it all together in a way that makes sense was very satisfying to me.
Right, fantastic.
So
Let me turn the corner a little bit on this. So what advice would you give to females today? What would you tell them from your experience?
I think one of the things is when you get into an environment where mostly you're working with men, which is what I was doing, you got to have a sense of humor.
Okay, that's a good story. Okay.
Because everything is not going to be perfect.
Right.
And if you take everything like with resentment and or somebody's against me, instead of just thinking that they're not understanding, I mean, I think it goes a long way to have a sense of humor about what you're doing and how you're interacting with other people. So because that's just there.
And what would you tell them about STEM and getting into careers in science and engineering and so forth? Would you tell them that's the right thing to go do and make it happen? You're going to love it? Or how would you approach that with?
I think it's individual. I mean, if you like technology and science and so, I think it's a wonderful direction to go. But I don't see any of my grandkids doing that. I'd love it. Well, maybe our youngest one will end up that way. But none of them are really gaming for technology. But if it's not their interest, don't do it.
Well, that's certainly appropriate too.
That's the bottom line.
But those who do have got, like you did when you were a kid, really like science and engineering and were interested in that world, even though that isn't where you actually started in college, would you encourage them to go grab that brass ring and make it happen? And
sure.
Because that's absolutely the right thing for anybody to do, and females should not be excluded from it. In fact, they should be included.
Well, I don't think there are enough females. I think that...
Well, there certainly aren't in high tech at any of the upper levels.
And
any way you want to measure it.
I mean, there are differences between men and women,
Right.
and the way that we approach problems. And it's not bad to have both approaches to the problem. Neither one is 100% right. But, if you get a mixture of people and cultures and approaches, I think it's better.
Well, I absolutely agree with that.
So having a diverse workforce and people with different ideas and really listening to the ideas of people. I don't know who it was at DEC, but somebody always talked about, the people draw the management tree with the manager on top and going down. Really and truly, we work for the people who do all of that. It's our job to make them
I don't know who said that, but that's
successful.
brilliant. Yeah, absolutely.
Somebody said that, and that's always stuck with me, that I don't think that the people who worked for me were somebody that I dictate to. I'm more supporting them so they can bring their ideas forward.
Okay.
So, I mean, I think that's important too.
What do you think about what's happening right now in the world, especially with the Me Too movement and what's going on there? Is this on the right track? Is it overreaction? Is it even underreaction? But what's happening there?
I've had my experience with Me Too moments and things that happened. And, it's hard. You have trouble sometimes figuring out how to handle it. But it's part of what did happen to women. I don't know if it still happens as much in technology. I haven't heard that many people talk about it.
Well, actually, I think the most of the talk about Silicon Valley, it happens all the time.
I'm sure it does.
Yeah.
I haven't heard people in Silicon Valley talking about it, but
well, Silicon Valley, of course, is a very male-dominated deal, and I think most of the females that have tried to move into Silicon Valley have had a Me Too unit moment many times.
Yep.
At least that's what it sounds like, based on the statistics I've heard.
Right. The most interesting moment that I had, and you'll probably find this a little surprising, was I had a guy that was interviewing for a job.
Okay.
And so I took him out for lunch, as you take people out for lunch and so on. And we're driving back in the car, and all of a sudden I find his hand going up my skirt up my leg under my skirt, and I'm driving.
Wow, there's a Me Too moment.
So it's like, take your hands off. And then, he tried to grab me later. And so somebody you're interviewing for a job, excuse me.
That's pretty outlandish. No?
Yeah. So,
Wow.
I mean, things.
So you've had these experiences, absolutely.
I've had those experiences.
And you certainly had the guy that lost the job as the VP of storage call you up to say you're going to fail. At the same
Yes.
time, you had another guy call you up and say,
Yes.
I'll do anything I can to help you.
That's right.
So you had both at the same time.
I had both within the same day. So,
Wow. So, how about the vision for the future of the storage in the computing world? Have you got any ideas of where that's heading? And
I've been away from storage for quite a while now. And so I'm really not familiar. I've been away from it for like 10 years.
Well, let me bring it down a little bit more down to earth. You already talked about diddly. You were working on something 30 plus years ago that is just now beginning to become practical and going into
Right, yes
in
it
the world.
is.
I mean, people have been working on some of those ideas for a long time, but really it's just now on the precipice of beginning to become
That it can become
launched.
commercially viable, a lot of it, yeah.
And I know you believe in this, but you got to admit this is something that's really going to be important in the future.
Oh yeah, I
That
think
capability.
I think it will be, and I remember when I first learned about relational databases, and people talking about whenever there's a new technology, it typically takes 30 years.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah, absolutely.
So,
Which the time is right.
yeah,
Yeah, and just the fact that it actually had neural network work in it, the fact that it had oral
voice recognition.
voice recognition kind of command structures in it, and the ability to be able to answer that. He could go into as complicated a world as medical world and start talking about in medical language what you're trying to do.
Yep.
That was way ahead of the cart, way ahead. And
Back then, we had to train the voice recognition system
yeah, absolutely.
on a specific voice
Yeah.
and intonations. Now they're such that you don't have to train it. You can
Right.
most anybody can go up and talk
Yeah,
to.
Siri and the other one, they basically
Yes.
pick you up right away. But you're
Right.
absolutely right. In fact, that was the time frame when they had to train them to do handwriting. You couldn't
Yeah,
even
everything,
write on a
yeah.
tablet without learning how they build a character.
Yeah.
And the voice recognition, now I remember going to a conference about that time when they talked about the percentage of voice recognition that was accurate, and it was in the 80% range. Well, 80% means you got like
A lot of
20% of errors, which is a ton of errors. I mean, it's about
Yeah.
clobbers every word in there.
Yep.
You're not going to have a lot of clean phrases, let alone clean sentences and clean paragraphs. So, and now I wouldn't be surprised if it was up in the high 90s.
Probably. I mean, we have personal experience with some of this when we try to speak with Richard's mom.
Oh, do you?
Well, she's virtually deaf.
Okay.
And so when you try to talk to her on the phone or whatever through one of these network things, and there's a human also involved, but even with all that, she can't get it and hear it, and, it's still not 100%. So.
Well, do you do that with like FaceTime so that she can read lips, or do you try to do it?
No, because she's almost blind. So.
That's why she's blind, so she can't read. Okay,
Right.
Okay.
So, I think technology hopefully can help with people with issues like that. For all of us as we're getting older, there are always going to be gaps of one kind or
We
another.
can use all the help we can get.
You better believe it.
All right. Well, how about run out of questions?
Look at that.
Anything else you want to add? Advice to the world, or comments that you've forgotten to mention, or people have forgotten to mention?
Nothing strikes me offhand. I can just say I consider myself incredibly lucky to have worked where I've worked and with the people I worked at. Digital was a phenomenal place to work.
Oh, I absolutely agree with that.
And I know if the Compaq acquisition hadn't happened and we'd been going on, I'd probably still be working unless they kicked me out the door. Because it was a great place to work with really good people. On the other hand, getting out into the world and doing some of the consulting we did, it wasn't until afterward I realized how much I learned from each of those experiences. So I think the ability to go into go into Zyotech and work with them, or some of the other companies that we worked with. You know, you learn so much from each engagement that you have that you don't even know you've learned.
No, I absolutely agree with you on that. There's no question about that.
And so I felt incredibly lucky to go back and have the position at Xiotech after I'd had, you know, the digital experience, several years of consulting, and then I got dropped into this hornet's nest trying to integrate the companies. And I felt like it brought all the skills that I had learned over the years to bear in order to do that. And it was an incredibly gratifying way to end my career, so to speak, to have a successful experience that was as complex as that and drew on my background the way it did.
Well, you've definitely got a string there from the time that you made that decision to go back to school through your consulting and your work at DEC and the culture thing all the way down to this last episode of trying to straighten out a manufacturing operation with a supplier. That is fundamentally based on learning what you need to do as fast as you can. Don't just read about it and then copy somebody else's game plan.
Yeah.
And of course, a lot of that is very complimentary to what Mike Riggle did for himself.
Mm-hmm.
Same kind of approach. Basically, you got to do the work
Yeah,
to understand it.
you do.
If you don't do the work, it's like doing your math, but never carrying down the numbers, just guessing the bottom line.
Right, right.
Yeah, you don't really learn much.
Yeah, so that was very gratifying, that last full-time assignment at now XIO, Xiotech, whatever they're called today,
It's now XIO, yeah.
back again. That was just gratifying because it pulled everything together in a way to kind of tie up my career. So I'm satisfied with, even though I went back and did the little manufacturing thing, I'm satisfied with being retired and doing pottery and different kinds of things in my life. I feel like I've had a good run at it.
Good. Well, it's been a pleasure.
Thanks, Tom. It's fun to see you. I mean, we've had so many interactions over the years.
Absolutely, we definitely have. And anyway, good luck in the future, and you and Richie take
too.
care. And
You too. We'll see you, I'm sure.
I guarantee you will. Take care.